Comic Geek Speak presents the Crisis Tapes episode 23, Crisis on Infinite Earths, issue 6, part 1. And welcome back to the Crisis Tapes. This is your host, Peter.
And Adam. Coming to you from two separate parallel Earths here.
We really are doing the whole Dr. Occult Alan Scott thing right now.
Yes. Communicating through the ether with our symbol of 7 and magic battery in the form of microphones, as it turns out. This is a Zoom call, is what we're saying.
Right.
We're not physically present in the same recording space. I think this is the first time we've tried this, isn't it, Peter?
For our purposes, right? We've done Skype before, but that was through the old CGS studio. So I mean that didn't really. It's not really the same thing as this for us. So who knows what this is going to turn out to be, folks? But
it's crazy.
I have to say though, in the past, when was the last? So the last episode dropped back in January of 2020. So you realize we are, to talk in crisis terms, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. We're post-crisis. We're post-pandemic.
Yes,
not really, because it's still going on.
In the time of the great disaster.
Yeah.
This is the future world that's coming, I guess.
So the last episode was January of 2020, and we were hot on. 4 episodes taking a look at issue 5. I thought we had a really great, awesome bit of energy for all those 4 episodes, and then life decided to throw a curveball in many ways, and it came time again because during that time span, I've gotten a lot of emails, people saying, another Crisis Tapes. When are you doing another Crisis? I said, it's coming. It is coming. It's coming. So now here it is.
Haven't been pestering me quite as much, but every once in a while somebody says something on Facebook, hey, Crisis Tapes, please. And well, here you go.
Here you go.
Yes. And usually we don't need an excuse to wait a year between episodes, but this year we had a great one.
Right. And we did try. I think we tried earlier, but then my laptop fried last year,
And trying to pick up a new laptop right now when the demand for them is so high. Every school child in the country needs one for remote learning. So
we are going to, we're always upfront about our plans. We were originally going to look at Crisis on Earth CW, the TV miniseries. We thought we could sort of power through a couple of those episodes. But then as the months went on, and because we are kind of in the middle of, an act right now within the issues, we're at the second part of Act 2, if you want to call it that. Just made more sense to continue. Let's just keep going with the issues and see what happens.
Yeah. And we're going to have to take a time out to talk about some crossovers soon, though, because those little editorial captions are starting to creep into the text here.
Yeah, definitely. I figure we'll do the whole second act. Let's go up to 7 and 8, and then just like we did after the first 4 issues, or first 4 episodes. No, I should say first 4 issues because they took longer than 4 episodes.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, that'll be a great place to do another interlude, I think, and look back on all the tie-ins, and we can talk about where they fell and all that stuff.
Would we maybe try to tackle the Arrowverse crisis at that point, or save that for Crisis in other media at some far future?
Maybe. I mean, if we're on a break between acts, we could do whatever we want, right? We could do a couple episodes of just chatter.
The blue sky possibilities.
Right. I don't think they mind where we go on our journey. They're just thankful that, we're continuing.
Yep. And so are we.
We did get one. We got some feedback on the forum. We don't want to discount the forum. We don't have that it was, most of it was reactionary to those episodes. We got an email that's a little more general, so I wanted to share this. This is from Joshua Romano and says, I am one of the Crisis kids you mention in early episodes. Crisis came out when I was 11. And although I love the post-Crisis Superman, Batman, and Justice League, Crisis is a source of melancholy. It represents the loss of the versions of these heroes from my childhood. To browse through Mike's Amazing Worlds newsstand, I feel the loss every time a pre-Crisis character has the notation, no further appearances, in the months during and immediately after the crisis. I know with reminders from the monitoring the Monitor episodes that pre-Crisis Superman is silly, but there is still a tone and spirit to those characters that is gone. That melancholy and nostalgia is what drew me to Crisis 4.5 in Legends of the DC Universe. It demonstrates that stories set in the old multiverse are still possible, although Convergence missed the mark.
Largely agree.
Incidentally, Mike's newsstand identifies the period right after Crisis as a merged Earth, when heroes still remembered Supergirl and the Earth when Superman met Booster Gold, for example, and that it lasted until Man of Steel. My personal headcanon is that the post-Crisis universe was actually started when Mechanique stopped holding back the Crisis in All-Star Squadron 60.
Mm-hmm.
Despite my maudlin feelings about Crisis, it is still the most impactful story I've ever read in comics, and I love the work that you guys are doing. Josh.
Well, thank you, Josh. And I definitely agree that Mechanique's machinations are a useful periodization there. Certainly it worked for Roy Thomas. It helped him to keep pre-Crisis Earth 2 around for just a little bit longer until he could wrap things up.
I did what he said, listening to the Monitor, that pre-Crisis Superman is silly. I don't think we necessarily disregard the pre-Crisis Superman, right? Like, we understand that, the Silver Age largeness of that character can be silly to some people. But I mean, yes, it's silly, but it's also lovable silliness. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have no ill thoughts about the pre-Crisis Superman.
No. No, we are not the guys to be denigrating the Silver Age Superman. I'm not going to deny that he's silly, but like you said, Peter, it's a lovable, endearing kind of silliness.
Yeah. So thank you, Joshua. We appreciate that, and love to hear from Crisis Kids. And we're right there with you, as both Adam and I, still love to hear and read, or love to read and find new facts about the pre-Crisis DC universe. Both of us probably still, when we were able to, back issue bin and still fill in holes from the 80s and 70s. So it is not forgotten in our hearts, that's for sure.
Yeah, and never more shall be.
So before we get into the issue, I do have a Crisis fun fact, something that we like to do every now and then, just to sometimes tease behind the scenes stuff with Crisis or trivia about the Crisis. My Crisis fun fact today, Adam, is kind of a continuation of when we looked at the cover to issue number 5.
When we spent 3 hours, I think, looking at that cover. I think it rings a bell. Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a few more minutes here. One of the things we talked about, I think a random comment that came up was all of these characters. It would be interesting to go through all of their creators to see which writer created the most characters and which penciler helped to create most of these characters. So I did the legwork. Wow. Didn't take that long at all, surprisingly.
Oh, that is surprising, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to take a guess to which writer do you think helped to co-create the most characters on that cover? I won't preface it any more than that. Any guesses?
Two names come to mind.
Okay.
One an old school creator and one a newer school creator, who was very influential at DC at that time. My guesses are Gardner F. Fox and Roy Thomas.
You would be absolutely correct as the number 1 and the number 2, respectively.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Gardner Fox co-created 14/15 characters. I'll explain that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Thomas, because they just well, let me not preface anything. So Roy Thomas, 12 characters. And the third one, Jerry Siegel.
Oh. That I would not have guessed.
So I'll go through some of the names of the characters. Let's jump to penciler. What penciler do you think helped to? This is a harder one probably. Helped to co-create the most characters on that issue number 5 cover.
Yes, that is going to be a little tricky. Huh. And well, being more writer-oriented than artist-oriented too, it's doesn't exactly favor me.
I'll give you a hint.
Okay, appreciated.
The reason the penciler with the most characters is because Roy Thomas also has a lot of characters. That help?
Huh. Less than it should. The name that was standing out in my mind was Joe Kubert. That probably doesn't apply here. I know he did the covers for the first year or so of All-Star Squadron, but I don't think he did the interiors. So, yeah.
Joe Kubert is third.
Okay.
With 4.
At least I was somewhat in range.
Yeah. So the trying to connect to Roy Thomas because there are a heck of a lot of, if not all, of the Infinity Inc. members, which means Jerry Ordway.
Right.
Tops out the penciler list with 9/10 characters. I'll explain that. The next one up, the next 2 tied for 6. Of course, this is if my math is right. If I wasn't too blurry-eyed by the time I was done and all that. Tied for second place with 6 each, Carmine Infantino and Mr. George Perez.
I thought of both of them.
And then that puts Joe Kubert with 4 in third place. So, any reaction to that or questions or anything? I'll go through it a little bit more.
It's a little surprising, but not too surprising.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't think of Ordway, actually. I was thinking in terms of ASS instead of Infinity, which was maybe a little foolish of me.
Yeah, I mean, Gardner Fox, right, all over the Earth 2 or Golden Age, Ragdoll, Red Tornado, Sandman, Starman, Atom of Earth 1, Dr. Fate, Flash of Earth 2. Now, the reason I have slashes is because Gardner Fox created the original Dr. Light, but not the female Dr. Light, right? So I kind of gave a little bit of a nod, but even without Dr. Light, Gardner Fox still has 14, which is
yeah, clearly.
So
I guess Wolfman himself would get the other half of that slash, right?
Correct. And there are so between Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Robin, Green Arrow, you definitely have their first appearances, but you can also make the distinction for some of those between the true Earth 2 Superman versus when did quote Superman of Earth 1 first had his stories, or Wonder Woman, or Batman, etc. So I really broke it down that way. I gave the first appearances, but also the first appearance of their very distinct Earth presences, because that's what Crisis is about, and that's why Jerry Ordway gets the slash, because he did not create Tarantula, but he created the costume that Tarantula is using on that cover. So
that does make sense.
Yeah. I mean, the tricky ones were like Robin, right? Because the Robin of Earth 2 is a Gardner Fox creation. But Robin himself is, Bill Finger and
I see. Making a distinction between the Golden Age appearances of these characters and their appearances qua Earth 2 characters, right, when they're explicitly identified as being from a parallel Earth, which takes us well into the Silver Age, or in some cases, Bronze Age.
Right. So that was tricky, you know. Roy Thomas, as I said, the Infinity Inc. Some of these characters like Fury, Joni Thunder, Firebrand are also credited to Dan Thomas, his writing partner, his wife.
Right.
But also characters like Fog and Tsunami, Amazing Man. And who did I say was number? Oh, the third place, Jerry Siegel. Right. Okay, so you have Superman and you have Luthor, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's also credited with the distinction of the Earth One Luthor when they start to get into the Superboy stories, which is kind of like the marking place for the Earth One, the Luthor that gets his hair blown off, basically.
Right.
But then he also, Siegel, apparently, if my notes are right, created the Superman of Earth 2, or at least wrote that story. Is that right? I think that's right. I'd have to check that.
Yeah, because the first appearance of Earth 2 Superman as Earth 2 Superman was in a Justice League story.
Yeah.
I don't think Siegel ever wrote the Justice League.
I'll look at that when we if I have a moment. I'll look at that.
Well, he should get Ultra Humanite, shouldn't he?
He gets the proto Ultra Humanite, right? Like the first appearance, and also Dolores Winters. But Jerry Conway is the one that got the nod for me for the albino gorilla. Who else? Jerry Siegel also the Spectre, Chameleon Boy, Robot Man of Earth 2, Star Spangled Kid. So that's why he got a bunch. We talked about Jerry Ordway. It's basically all Infinity Inc. and Amazing Man. George Perez, Dr. Light 2, also the Ultra Humanite gorilla version. Starfire, Nightwing, Cyborg, Deathstroke, of course. Joe Kubert, Hawkman of Earth 1, Neptune Perkins, Sergeant Rock, Monocle, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, yeah, he was a Hawkman villain. That makes sense.
So I think this is a fascinating, it was a fascinating look through, the creators. Very few creators who created the character themselves, which could be a fun trivia thing, but like Jack Cole created Plastic Man. Martin Nodell created Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern. Mike Grell created Warlord, and then Jack Kirby, Commandy, and the Golden Age DC Manhunter, and then Zatara is credited to Fred Gardenier. So I think those were the only ones. I might have missed a few that there was only one name attached to a character, which is kind of cool. So that's my little fun fact.
Some unexpected statistics, and I continue to be surprised that it didn't take you very much work to put them together.
Like maybe 2 hours or so. The good thing about Google nowadays, you can just go and, because I had all the names, right, of the characters that I had to research. But then Google, you can just say characters created by Jerry Conway, and then a list comes up, and then I just sort of go through and I go, okay, there you go. Same thing with Roy Thomas and George Perez and all that. So I was like, there it all is. It's actually, that was pretty simple. So apparently, I'm looking up the Kal-El, the Earth 2 Superman. This is what I used. I used just one of the DC wikis that I sometimes use. First appearance, Justice League of America 73, Denny O'Neil and Dick Dillon. I see what I did. Yeah. He gets the credit for Superman Earth 2 because that's the proto. I really should have wrote proto Superman, not Superman of Earth 2. So it's Denny O'Neil that gets the credit for Superman of Earth 2. Yeah. I'm in my notes that's just meant to be. So he probably is at 9. No, it's still 10 because Luthor's 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh no, it should be 9. But he still gets third place. So it doesn't.
Still quite impressive.
Yeah. There you go. Your Crisis Fun Fact based on the issue number 5.
5 episodes later, we're still talking about it. But what a challenge lies before us now, Peter.
Yes.
Yes. It's our pledge to you, the listener, that we will not stop. Nay, we will not even halt to catch our breath before we have named every single character on the cover of Crisis on Infinite Earths number 6.
This is going to take an hour. No, we're joking. The only cover to receive just one character.
Mm-hmm. And an extreme close-up of it's not even the character's whole body. It's just his face. His big, ugly, armored antimatter mug.
And who do we have? At last, as the cover says, who is it?
The Anti-Monitor. And that cover blurb, or that cover banner, I guess, that reads "At last, the Anti-Monitor," I believe is the first time that the name Anti-Monitor is used in print in the series.
My notes, I concur.
And as we see when we open the issue, he's referred to by those few people who are actually interacting with him, and namely the Psycho Pirate primarily, as Monitor. He thinks of himself as Monitor, the monitor of the antimatter universe. As anti, that would be an exonym, something applied to him from without. Yeah, in addition to that, I was going to lodge into one of my background materials here.
Awesome.
Just talking more about the naming, or as we were joking before we started recording, the non-naming of the Anti-Monitor. I'm resorting to the Crisis Compendium, which came packaged with the Crisis Absolute Edition, compiled by DC historian John Wells. Among many of the interesting background materials included in here are several in-house memos sent around to the DC staff by the Crisis Brain Trust of Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, and Bob Greenberger. So here's a memo in which Wolfman explains the nature of the central conflict of Crisis and mentions the villain to DC writers and staffers for the first time. Let's see. The DC multiverse and the various Earths and dimensions, including the antimatter dimension where the weaponers of Quard hail from. Just as our multiverse has a positive monitor, so there exists an anti-monitor. And that's lowercase a. So that gives you the idea that this is not the official name of the character yet at this point. It's not a name so much as it is a description. He just took the negative prefix anti and stuck it in front of the monitor to describe what the character is going to be like. It is the anti-monitor who has taken the naturally expanding multiverse and accelerated the process, taxing the finite life force in the positive multiverse. The monitor is aware of this and needs champions to go throughout time and space to specific crux points and prepare to bring the positive multiverse into alignment, once more creating a universe. Our heroes and villains will be dispatched throughout the various Earths and times to find these crux points, while the Monitor prepares for a final confrontation with his antimatter counterpart. This will occur about halfway through the Maxi series, and the Monitor will lose and die. Our characters will then have to stop the anti-monitor and bring the multiverse together before their very existences are rendered null. Some will live, some die, others will change costumes or powers, while others will be introduced into the DC universe. We end with one universe, one Earth, and one common groundwork to launch our second 50 years. And after this, John Wells, the historian, takes over with a bit of commentary. As the above memo indicates, DC named the major villain Anti-Monitor. In point of fact, that was never supposed to be his name. It was a placeholder to be used while the Troika being Wolfman, Wein, and Greenberger, racked their brains trying to come up with something better. As Marv joked later, being given a name like Anti-Monitor sort of limited his job possibilities. Unfortunately, when it was no longer possible to delay giving the master villain an actual name, they still hadn't come up with anything they liked better. Reluctantly, Marv settled on the name they'd been using all along. For good or bad, DC's biggest, baddest villain was now called the Anti-Monitor, capital A. And that's what shows up on the cover of issue 6.
It's so interesting because when you think about the Crisis on Earth CW, Cisco Ramon vibe was constantly making jokes about, really? We're calling him Anti-Monitor? Really? That's the best? So I wonder if that was Marv Wolfman's input or, just his way of sort of saying, oh yeah, I didn't like that name either, but we stuck with it. So very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Any remarks to make about the Perez imagery here on the front cover? Just
I do.
Monitor's face staring out at us?
Yeah. Probably talk about it when we get to the full image of the character in the on the splash page. This is the second time we've seen him. We saw him on a splash page in issue 5, which he was like a bust shot. So now this is the second time we see him on the cover. The third time we see him will be the full shot. So I'll talk a little bit about, there are a lot of parallels between the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor in terms of the design. As you mentioned in the compendium, we're halfway through with issue 6. By the end of issue 6, we're halfway through. So it makes sense that finally we are getting the character. I think some of the, I'll just talk about the facial aspects between both the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor. They both are designed with very heavy brows. They have similar designs when it comes to, Monitor has these, for lack of a better word, cornrows on the top of his head coming to a point. So does the Anti-Monitor, but they're metallic instead of hair. Even the Anti-Monitors, these rods that are kind of at the temples are a little similar to what Monitor has. Also has those little cornrows on the side of his temples. So Para's really flipping, trying to have similar design elements, which we'll get to when we get to the first splash page. One of the things that I wanted to throw at you is, okay, the Anti-Monitor is revealed. We've read a few letter columns, even in this issue, where people are trying to guess who it is, throwing out names like Darkseid, right? So some people who thought this was Darkseid behind it all. And I wanted to ask you, and I'm assuming we might have talked about this before, but did you have a reaction to this character? Did you already know about him beforehand? And just on an objective level, does it make sense that it's a completely new character? And do you think the weight of the title phrase saying "at last the Anti-Monitor" does it have weight? Does it mean something? So what do you think about that?
Well, the Anti-Monitor part of it probably didn't carry a lot of weight for people at the time. It's more like, at last the culprit, at last the master villain revealed. I mean, the name was probably a little underwhelming to people even at the time. As for me, my first inklings of the Crisis story and its significance came from reading old back issues of Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe that I'd found at an Atlantic bookstore in Stone Harbor when I was just starting to dip my toe into DC and its history. So I read about the so-called Crisis on Infinite Earths over and over again in those entries, and the Anti-Monitor was mentioned multiple times. So I knew that some mysterious figure called the Anti-Monitor was responsible for all, the genocidal doings of the DC of this story. So when I finally got around to reading it, the first issue of this story I read was number 8. It was the first one that I found. So that I kind of was exposed to this character in reverse in that respect. So I got to see his second design first, in that big blue and orange battle armor that, to this very day, it reminds me of like a
Michelin Man?
No, it reminds me of a humanoid mechanical whale.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so then encountering him in this form, it's like, oh, he looks a little more like a human. He looks a little scarier. To me, it always seemed to me as if the Anti-Monitor were like an action figure come to life to menace all existence in the DC Comics diegesis. He's never been the most... In and of himself, he's not all that frightening and not all that complex. It's more what he represents.
Yeah, I'll take that. And I think that's going to speak a lot to the comparisons between him and Monitor, design-wise. But then once we get to the origin, I think we're going to really probably see a lot of that too.
Oh yeah. That's when we see we see a little bit of Wolfman's thought process as his drawing on existing mythological traditions to build this little pocket apocalypse for DC's superhero world. And as far as whether or not this should have been an existing character like a Darkseid, I'm actually very glad that they went this route, but with a new antagonist, something threatening and unknown. Or threatening because unknown, I should say. If it had just been Darkseid, as some people were calling out for, I think we're agreed that we're mutually glad that they didn't go that route, because number one, I know the Fourth World stuff has never been our favorite comics. Number two, I'm glad that they allowed the Fourth World stuff to kind of stand on its own in its own little separate cosmos. I mean, they touched on it, they allowed it a cameo towards the end. Darkseid got his hand in there somewhere, but out of respect for Kirby, if nothing else, I think I'm just as happy that they did not get Darkseid too centrally embroiled in this particular Crisis story. It's not the path that very many future crises followed, I should add, between Final Crisis and that the Darkseid War story that Jeff Johns did in the New 52 a little while ago, which also involved the Anti-Monitor and the Crime Syndicate, etc., etc. I think it was the right move to just create a completely different character as sort of iconic of the specific, the nature of this story and its aims as far as revising the DC universe. I think just this largely. He almost comes. The Anti-Monitor almost comes off as a force of nature more than a true personified villain, and I think that's just as well for the kind of story that they're telling here.
Right, and certainly he is the precedence in many ways, because not all events have a truly unique villain attached to it, but certainly when you get to things like Underworld Unleashed and you get Neron for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Imperiex for Worlds at War, Solaris for DC 1 million, like things created specifically, characters created specifically for, in many ways, I guess you could even say Parallax, but that's built on the back of Hal Jordan. But still, like this idea, this notion of here's an event, here's a new big bad, and sometimes they stick, and sometimes they don't stick.
Seems to me more often than not they don't, but
right?
They're still fun in the moment. They become like iconic representations of whatever the central theme or conflict of a given story happens to be, and they become indelibly associated with that story in fan memory.
Right.
Actually, I think the time has come for me to quote some further passages from my thesis.
Oh, it's back. Love when thesis makes an appearance. Great.
It's right here flopped in my lap. So, time to talk a little bit about the Anti-Monitor. While the heroes of Two Earths attempt to make sense of the anachronistic anarchy, the reader is finally introduced to the Monitor's mysterious enemy, the master of the Shadow Demons and the Antimatter Wave, the DC Universe's newly anointed god of death. He is a tall, cadaverous figure in heavy armor, clearly inhuman, the utterly warlike master of a dark antimatter universe that exists parallel to the positive matter multiverse. His aim? To eradicate all positive matter universes and absorb their energies, thus making himself the all-powerful ruler of the only universe left in existence. His name? The Monitor. However, it quickly becomes clear that this is not the same benevolent observer and caretaker to which readers have already been introduced, but his Jungian shadow, an antimatter doppelganger who is soon referred to in the text, for reasons of convenience as much as anything else, as we've already discussed, the Anti-Monitor. As a primal, iconic, demonic being of pure evil, the Anti-Monitor is not a terribly complex character, but his existence as such is necessary to the overall project of the Crisis series. While some cultures have produced apocalypse myths have imagined the end of the world as a natural catastrophe, or even a necessary step in the evolution of being, many other cultures have denied any natural death, ascribing all extinction to violence, and as the individual life is violently terminated, so is the entire cosmos. Since the superhero genre is fundamentally based on violent conflict and produced for a largely conservative fan culture, it is not surprising that a superhero apocalypse myth, which is basically what Crisis is, should follow the latter pattern in having a definite antagonist. As it happens, Crisis walks a fine line between the natural catastrophe and great destroyer formulae, but favors the latter. The antimatter wave that brings about universal extinction appears much like a force of nature, and the new universe that replaces the old ones is described explicitly as the natural and proper state of being, the universe that was always meant to be. As they're always, Wolfman just goes to great pains over and over again to tell us this is the way things were always supposed to be, this one universe that we're foisting on you. Yet, the entire process of universal renewal is set in motion by an abominable personified evil and accomplished through mass genocide. The inclusion of the Anti-Monitor and his shadow demons as instigators of the apocalypse gives DC Comics fans an identifiable villain to root against, to bear the brunt of any displeasure fans might feel at what is being done to their beloved DC multiverse. In essence, the Anti-Monitor serves as a scapegoat for the actions of DC editorial, who conceived of the Crisis event, made the decisions as to which characters would live or die, and are therefore technically the real-life villains of the Crisis. That's my rationale for why there is a main antagonist at all, as opposed to just a natural disaster the heroes have to try to stop. And I have a little more to say about the Anti-Monitor, too. Let's see here. Or about both of them, I should say. Depending on one's interpretation, the shadow play between the Monitor and Anti-Monitor betrays an allegorical connection to the real-life circumstances leading up to the publication of Crisis on Infinite Earths. The Monitor can be read as a representation of the contingent of fiercely loyal DC Comics fans who were most dedicated to the old DC multiverse and its cluttered continuity. He is a symbol of potentiality and passivity, more a spectator than an agent, dedicated to cultivation and contemplation of the status quo. He is also an all-seeing oracular figure, a god of encyclopedic knowledge, not unlike certain DC Comics readers who could recite years' worth of DC continuity by chapter and verse. And I did look at you as I said that, Peter. The Monitor's brother, on the other hand, is aggressive, ruthless, and single-mindedly destructive, interested only in conquest and annihilation. In this, the Anti-Monitor could be seen to represent a number of real-life entities and conditions. The harsh realities of the comic book market of the 1980s, a new generation of readers who cared little for continuity and were interested in superheroes primarily to see action and violence, the encroachment of outside media that were anxious to adapt DC's superhero characters but saw the characters' long and complicated histories as an impediment. That's more true now than ever. Remember, kids, you can't spell Anti-Monitor without AT&T. Where was it? In any case, the Anti-Monitor stands for forces or conditions that are inhospitable to DC continuity, that think it does not matter, hence a new connotation for the use of the term anti-matter in the story. The presentation of such entities in villainous guise is somewhat ironic, for it was DC Comics' desire to ingratiate themselves to these same entities that drove them to simplify DC continuity and thus to create Crisis as a mythical mediation between the corporate objectives of DC Comics and the needs and desires of devoted fans. Interestingly, in this, well, never mind. The rest of that paragraph we'll get to some other time.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's what I have to say, basically, about the Anti-Monitor as an antagonist, as a symbolic villain here.
Right. I think what's so interesting too is the Perez way, the way Perez draws this character, and inside the book, there's no physical language, as you sort of alluded to before. The eyes are dead, the body, the face almost looks like. You made the whale reference, like it looks like the baleen, the mouth and all that looks like the teeth of the whale. He just
baleen.
Yeah, he just stands like nothing, like an action figure, like you said. I mean, there's no there's no anima, there's no presence, there's nothing to it, which is not a terrible description for the antimatter itself. So I love everything that you said, because I do think there is a real. I mean, we make the joke about the Wolfman, right? Like the Wolfman says, But there's a lot of fingers that are in this event while it's going on, and there's a lot of decisions that get changed at the last minute. And like in this issue, for instance, we see Black Canary in her new costume that debuted in Who's Who #2, and in the Detective Comics issue this month. That's something that Perez had to be aware of, that people have to keep giving updates on. Oh, well, now the Green Lantern is John Stewart, not Hal Jordan. Now it's this costume, So I like that notion that you said, that the Anti-Monitor is basically like a stand-in of what's going on behind the scenes, because we've been talking about that with the antimatter cloud, that it's not even almost a destructive force. It's nullifying. It's completely erasing from the page and from our history and from our minds certain characters, and certainly ones we'll see later on that we'll never see again, versions that we'll never see again. So it's great. I always love when you go back to the thesis. So thank you for doing that. All right. God, see, again, we're not even into the issue yet. We're just at the cover. Let me just, a little context. This issue hit the stands June 6th of 1985. June is also the month that we would start to see those crossovers that we talked about, such as the Losers Special, which also shipped the same week, Infinity Inc. 18 and Wonder Woman 327 later in the month. We will get to those crossovers, as I said, after issue 8 when we wrap this act up. For context, some other things that were coming out at this time: Secret Wars number 2, issue 3, Squadron Supreme number 2, Superman 411, which was the Julius Schwartz birthday issue, Superman Annual 11, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons for The Man Who Has Everything.
Yes, which we've been meaning for years to do a footnotes of that. Eamon Clark over in the UK provided us with free copies. And so I've got mine on my if you're listening, Eamon, I've got my copy of that on my dresser at home. It's like a constant reminder of what we still owe you. And we're going to make good one of these days. Just you wait.
Who's Who number 7, Hex number 1. Technically not really a dividing line between pre and post crisis, but getting there. Like that, that's certainly, that was a decision that was made, while the crisis was still going on. Not necessarily, I don't think necessarily because of the crisis, but so I thought that was just an interesting thing that, and as I mentioned, Detective Comics 554, which is the first appearance of, in a regular comic, of Black Canary's new costume. And then writer-editor Marv Wolfman, penciler George Perez, inker Jerry Ordway, letterer John Costanza, and new colorist Thomas Zucco, Thomas J. Zucco. And I think we really do see that in this issue. There's quite there's a lot of thought behind the coloring in this issue that I have notes on.
Yep, and. Yes, it's pretty effective for the most part, and a lot of it lost in the recoloration of the 1998 hardcover collection. It's one of the things I like to do as we march along through these issues is compare and contrast the single issues with that trade edition. And the colors are sometimes improved by the recoloration of the 90s and just as often not.
Right. All right, I'm ready to go into the issue if you are.
Speaking of color, though, one last note from me about the cover. I love the use of the color orange. The 50th anniversary DC Bullet and the banner and sort of like the negative space of the lettering of the title. It's a great plasticky, just going back to what I said about the Anti-Monitor as a giant deadly action figure. It complements the blue of his armor, and it just kind of makes the whole thing look more toyetic.
So if you're listening to this one of these episodes for the first time, normally what we try to do is general thoughts about each specific scene. So that may be 2 pages, and maybe 5 pages, and then we go in very specifically with those pages. So we're not just going to go 1 page and then the next page and then we're going to try to hit it in terms of scenes. That's usually been our format for the longest time. And then we go back and talk about that scene. So Adam is the one that likes to do the major work by detailing what's actually happening per scene, and then we'll bounce around ideas. So I guess we really only need to talk about the first 2 pages right now.
Yep, it's a fairly brief scenelet to start us off here.
Okay.
Which doesn't follow directly from the end of the previous issue, because we did get a little bit of a tag with the Freedom Fighters at the end of issue 5, but there was a cliffhanger involving the reveal of the Monitor in bust form, as you said. And so this is the first 2 pages of this story are kind of a follow-up to that revelation, as we finally get to see the Anti-Monitor head to toe. The Psycho Pirate, he's gloating over the death of the Monitor and the impending destruction of his satellite. Meanwhile, the Psycho Pirate, as usual, is whining to be given a world to play with, emotionally emotions to shape and mold. And the Flash, Barry Allen of Earth One, is lying there on the floor, coming back to his senses because the Psycho Pirate's whining has distracted him from keeping Barry Allen's emotion in check. So he's just kind of lying there pretending to still be under the pirate's thrall and silently planning his next move as he listens to the interchange between the Anti-Monitor and the Psycho Pirate. Anti-Monitor finally decides to grant the Psycho Pirate's desire to have a world to play. In fact, he gives him more than he can handle by granting him the entire citizenry of 3 parallel Earths, the last 3 universes, apparently, left of the positive matter multiverse that the Anti-Monitor can still reach. Earth 1 and Earth 2 and their respective universes are safely tucked away in the Netherverse, thanks to the sacrifice of the Monitor, but Earth X, Earth S, and Earth 4 and their universes are still in play. And the Anti-Monitor puts the emotions of all human beings on those parallel Earths in the Psycho Pirate's control. And we get some really killer visuals of 3 Earths in the sclera of Psycho Pirate's eyes as he realizes that he's gotten more than he bargained for, and he screams. And that's the end of the first scene.
Anything that struck you? I have a ton of notes. I'm sure you have some notes.
I'm sure. Yeah, mine are never quite as thorough as yours, but there are a couple of things to be called out here. Okay, first page. This is going to be. This has been kind of a recurring feature of the trade repackaging of 1998, repackaging of the trade of 1998. It really stood out to me in this issue for some reason, but whoever was doing the proofreading for the trade edition apparently objected to the hyphenation of the word antimatter. Because as we go through issue number 6 here, every time we come across the word antimatter, it is hyphenated, just like the word anti-monitor is. But in the trade, somebody went through and eliminated as many of the hyphens as possible. Starting here on the first page, the second caption from the top, then ages later there was an accident, one which created an antimatter universe. Hyphenated in the original, not here. So almost not every, but almost every occurrence of the word antimatter in the trade eliminates that hyphen. There's one on page 21, right when Harbinger is making her play to save the remaining 3 universes, where the hyphen remains in the trade. So whichever editorial nitpicker decided that antimatter should be all one word was asleep at the switch on that one. As to more important matters here on the first page, I love the way Perez draws the Anti-Monitor the first time we see him here. Just it's the first time we see his feet, for one thing. He's just standing there like a robot cadaver. It's like equal parts alien war drone and zombie and witch king. And just his body language is the best, though. The way he's just standing there, arms at his sides, eyes blazing straight ahead. It's just so horrifically, eerily inexpressive. The best adjective I can think of to describe the way Perez plays him here in this scene is Karloffian. Because, if Boris Karloff were tapped, to play, back in the 30s in his prime, if he were tapped to play like the primordial embodiment of nihilism, that is probably how he would play the scene. They'd strap a few like car fenders on him for a costume, they'd give him some makeup, and he'd just stand there with his arms in his side and stare eerily ahead. So, yeah, Perez is doing virtually nothing as far as acting here, but his choice to have the character not act is, in a way, even more expressive and even more chilling than having him posture like a typical megalomaniacal villain would.
And to piggyback on that, this is where I start to see the dualities between the Monitor and Anti-Monitor, very obvious ones. The cape, the way the shoulder pads or shoulder whatever bits of armor flare out, just like the way you have to go back to the first the final page of Crisis on Infinite Earths #1, where we got the reveal of the Monitor, and you look at those 2 images and you start to see the similarities, not only in the face, the hair design, but like I said, the cape. And then I even did a thing because I really wanted to get into the design, because what you're talking about is it does mean something. So I took that that image from Crisis #1 and flipped it horizontally, turned it upside down. And so you see how the little circlet on the chest of the Anti-Monitor, it's like right at his like breastbone, you could say.
Little turbine or something.
Well, on the monitor, that's down by his belt buckle. And the little belt design and the little tunic design that the monitor has, the way some of those angles are on that white line, and it looks like a W and all that, actually looks like, when you look at the monitor, it looks like that's what's up at the chest of the monitor, not down at the belt. So it really looks like he took the monitor's design, flipped it 180 degrees, and sort of played around with some of the design elements. It's really interesting. And then, you pointed out the blue and the orange coloring. I said, let me take that monitor image from issue 1 and invert the colors and see if we get the Anti-Monitor just off that opening image. And some of the things did show up, like the gauntlets were blue on the original monitor image, when you did a total invert of color. So it's not quite the same, but the skin tone or the arms and the legs of the original monitor did turn orange, and everything, like the armor turned like a blue. It's an eerie sort of thing. Like, I don't know how in-depth Perez actually went, and it's not like he had a computer in 1985 that could do that. I guess. I don't think, but you don't get 100% match, but it's darn close. So, when you're talking positive and anti-positive or antimatter, one being the inverse, I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's almost like when Byrne took the Fantastic Four through the negative zone, and when they came back, their coloring inverted. Their original black and blue coloring inverted to it's blue and white, but I think it was supposed to be black and white. So
yeah.
So I love that. I love that I think there might be some thought behind both the design and coloring to match what you're talking about. I should also point out that his armor is similar to Lex Luthor's battle armor, which Perez also designed. If you put the two of them together, especially those things that come up right from the chest towards the mouth, those big tubes.
Yeah, those things, the little part mouth guard and part rear view mirror.
And the other thing that kind of struck me about this opening shot of the Anti-Monitor, I mean, I guess it's sort of along the same lines of what I already asked you. It's an interesting. We got the reaction from the last issue where they were like, "Oh my God!" They saw this being and they were like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And I guess I don't know. Maybe the Psycho Pirate is not used to the cosmic part of the DC universe, so I guess that might seem to make a little sense. I guess the Flash would react that way. I don't know. Or it's just the Wolfman, throwing out the high tension drama just to make them scared of him.
I thought of one other thing that the Anti-Monitor's armor reminds me of. I'm going to be dropping a little bit of a prog rock trivia here, but there's a classic Emerson, Lake and Palmer album called Tarkus. And it contains like a 21-minute long prog rock suite, which is supposed to be about the adventure of this strange creature called the Tarkus as it voyages across a post-apocalyptic landscape and battles. The Tarkus, it's depicted on the album art. It looks like a cross between an armadillo and a tank. And it's like this cybernetic creature that rolls along this blasted landscape, battling other cybernetic monsters. And it's kind of a sci-fi fantasy thing. And I think the Tarkus and the creatures it battles are supposed to be representative of the military-industrial complex. And I'm getting a little bit of that from the Anti-Monitor here, just harkening back to the points I was making in my thesis about how the Anti-Monitor represents some of the more heartless, dispassionate, profit-oriented forces at play in the economic publishing marketplace of the 80s. Like, he's the military-industrial entertainment complex. He doesn't care what he destroys and despoils. It's all in the name of conquest and profit. So maybe that's kind of what I'm picking up from this mechanical armor of his. And in terms of contrast with the Monitor, it's this is something else I said in the part of that paragraph in my thesis I chose to read later. But there's kind of a nature culture divide between Monitor and the Anti-Monitor. Monitor was born naked, and he lived for millennia just au natural, just meditating and contemplating the multiverse, whereas the Anti-Monitor was born fully armored.
I have a couple more things here just about this first page even. I'm struck by how this opening splash page feels like it could have been born out of like a Julius Schwartz method of doing stories. Coming up with the cover first and then saying, let's make a cool cover and create a story. Now I know it's a splash page, but if you kind of look at the composition, you have the big bad, you have the little Snives, Weasley character,
the toady,
and then you have the hero in peril, right? But what's the hero saying, right? He's sort of saying, "Oh God, I need to get out of this, but when I'm ready at last, I'll be able to act." It feels like it could have been a Silver Age cover, and then you're like, "Oh, well, what's the interior? Oh, this looks cool. Let me get in there," right?
Yeah, that's a good observation, Peter. I see what you mean. The good old days when the first page of a story usually just echoed whatever the cover was doing, and it's a flash forward, the exciting part of the story to follow.
Yeah, so I don't know if that was Perez intentionally doing that, but that's what I got out of it. I think the Perez Ordway team up and the new colorist is very strong, even on this first shot. And then I have here. So in the narration, they talk about the antimatter. Oh, I had a question about the hyphenation thing that you said. Is in your mind, is there a difference between anti/matter and antimatter? Without this, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Are they trying to make that distinction?
In my mind, no. I mean, there's probably a difference between antimatter as it's portrayed in DC Comics and antimatter as physicists think about it. I don't think the existence of antimatter has been proven yet. I think it's just kind of a theoretical concept as of now. But yeah, it's the antimatter of DC is it's largely mytho-symbolic, much more than it is scientific. So maybe that's the difference. But I looked it up this afternoon. It's most often styled unhyphenated in a lot of publications today. So maybe that's what they were thinking back in 1998. Like the antimatter was embarrassingly old-fashioned looking. Personally, I tend, when in doubt, I like to hyphenate things. I'm a strong proponent of the hyphen. I prefer, in my thesis, whenever I mention antimatter, I sure as hell hyphenated it there because that's the way it appeared in the original text as published in the 80s.
Right. So they talk about the antimatter universe, and they say we are there now. And I wrote here, that's interesting. We know that the Monitor has had a villain, a counterpart. And we know that there is an antimatter cloud, but I guess really we did not know that it truly was the antimatter universe yet, did we? Did we not? We certainly don't know that Quard is involved yet. But is this sort of the first real evidence that I think there might have been another mention about every time we lose a universe in the matter universe, my counterpart gets stronger. But did we mention the antimatter universe yet?
Well, possibly not by name. I'll admit I don't remember one way or the other, but it's been strong. I think it had been strongly hinted prior to this. I mean, we've seen some scenes set in the antimatter universe, though at first it was just like a place of infinite blackness, and you could only see like whichever positive matter characters were being focused on, be it Barry Allen or the Red Tornado or Psycho Pirate, in the middle of this blackness, and then there'd be this ominous voice again in like just white letters against the blackness speaking to them, and that would be the voice of the character we now know as the Anti-Monitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just feels like this is Wolfman's way of really putting the antimatter universe on the spot within the larger DC universe.
Bringing up the house lights on it, as it were. And
showing,
I like the rhetorical flourish of "we are there now."
Yeah.
We transport you now to Classic radio drama, theater of the mind kind of thing.
Yeah. And sort of how Jeff Johns spun Blackest Night out of a small Alan Moore story, Wolfman is spinning all of this out of basically Green Lantern concepts. I mean, we've talked about this before, and now it feels like it's getting even more, it's getting bigger, and he is putting his mark on it by creating this being, and then we'll learn about the origin in the next issue. And it's like, not only is there an antimatter universe, what you don't know is there's a big band behind it all. And, I feel like certain writers obviously get to do that in events, like Snyder creating the Dark Multiverse, or, John's beefing up Necron for Blackest Night. It's like, when you get to these certain levels, we talked about certain villains that don't have a lasting effect. Here's a case where maybe the Anti-Monitor, might not be in everybody's mind, but this notion of this universe, it's not just a Green Lantern thing anymore. It's a DC universe concept now.
Absolutely.
A few other things. We no longer have the white lettering on black colors for the Anti-Monitor. It is now reversed, so we can read it easier. He says, "My arch foe, my other self," which is a lot of the same dialogue that the Monitor had. And just using the Psycho Pirate to control the other three worlds, it seems like he's way more powerful than. But does he really need that? Is it a way to throw the heroes off their game? I just thought it was interesting. And I know what it is. It's Wolfman's just, he's got to write some drama, and he's got to introduce those worlds, because I feel like the Monitor probably could have just gone in and wiped them out, but maybe not. I don't know.
Instead, he wants to control their emotions first and then wipe them out.
I guess.
Well, the Monitor did say at some point that the menace we face is one of emotion. I had something to say about that in the thesis. I think it's, for purposes of plot and story, you're probably right. The Anti-Monitor didn't really need to have an emotional manipulator come in, be it Psycho Pirate, or as he mentions here at the top of page 2, the Girl Raven or the Woman Phobia, a couple of other emotional manipulating DC characters, both of them created by Wolfman, come to think of it, would have sufficed. Like clearly he thinks he needs an emotional manipulator in his corner. If not Psycho Pirate, then one of those two. But as to why, see, I have a passage in here about the Psycho Pirate that might shed some light on that, if I can find it.
Well, while you're looking for it, to play on that, I do find it interesting. I think there are a lot of counterpoints, a lot of similarities between what the Monitor did and what the Anti-Monitor is doing. And a lot of these a lot of these mirrored actions are really coming out in what we talked about in Act 1 versus what we're talking about in these in issues 5 and 6. So one of the other things that Wolfman did, not only did he break this story up into 4 issues, and 4 issues, but as you pointed out, every 2 issues almost feels like its own little story or chapter or whatever you want to call it.
It's true.
And I feel like these first 2 issues in this act, 5 and 6, when we get to the end, by the time we get to the end of 6, it's almost like Wolfman's taking the Anti-Monitor through exactly what he took the Monitor and the heroes through. So we started off with a random Earth dying, and in this act we started off with well, you could say like the Monitor dying, right? Let me look up exactly, because I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but while you were looking, I figured I'll just quick throw it in here because it might inform. Okay. So issue 5 feels like a rehash of sorts of both issues 1 and 2. Issue 6 feels like a rehash of both 3 and 4. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just using that word. The beats are the same. Earth dies in Act 1. The Monitor dies to set off Act 2. The gathering of the first heroes in issue 1. The gathering of the heroes that have to go to the 3 Earths. The introduction of the Monitor. The introduction of the Anti-Monitor. Sending those heroes to various Earths to the tuning forks, right? Sending the heroes here to these different Earths where Harbinger is sort of the big image, if you want to call it that, in the Anti-Monitor wall. And then the death of the Monitor to save the 2 Earths, and by the end of this issue, the death of Harbinger to save the 3 Earths. So there was this weird kind of parallel thing that I was seeing, and the first 4 issues were very much about the Monitor, but then he dies, and then these 4 issues that we're going to read feel very much about the Anti-Monitor. So again, purposeful? I don't know. It's this weird symmetry thing. I'm not saying that Wolfman is like Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and doing a symmetrical thing with Watchmen, but there's some parallels there that I like, and I'm going to try to hit home with them.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, I found the thing about Psycho Pirate.
Great.
Okay. The Psycho Pirate is a personification of the emotional cost of wars and disasters, an aspect that had been little considered in superhero comics prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is a debatable statement, I realize now, which combines elements of both war and disaster. The text repeatedly goes out of its way to portray the emotional responses of the everyday residents of the DC universe, and to show the hero characters in unfamiliar attitudes of grief, fear, doubt, despair, and desperate hope. All emotions that DC heroes rarely experienced within the generic security of the old oniric climate of their Silver Age stories. Emotion is one of the main themes of Crisis on Infinite Earths. The devastation in the story is framed as a state of mind as much as a physical occurrence. In the words of the Monitor, the menace we deal with is one of emotion. And the series itself was conceived in anticipation of the emotions of DC fans, serving as an expressive catharsis and a meaningful transition for them. And the character of the Psycho Pirate is crucial to the expression of that theme. So none of that really speaks to why, in story, the Anti-Monitor would perceive it as a necessity to have someone who control the emotions of people he's going to slaughter by the quadrillions anyway. But I guess he just figured it makes his job a little bit easier if people were frightened into leaping right into the nothing, as it were. But yeah. It's my reading of the Psycho Pirate and his emotional control in the thematic project of the series.
And I mean, Monitor had Harbinger, Anti-Monitor has Psycho Pirate. They both were collecting things in one way or another, heroes or worlds, or accessing those things. So yeah, and you have to have someone that we quote unquote know to give us the big bad. If it was just the Anti-Monitor, we don't have an in, we don't have an in to that villain.
Mm-hmm. And if we were given an in, the Monitor would seem less imposing. The Anti-Monitor would seem less imposing.
Yeah. Okay, now let's move on to our second scene here. This is pages 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the original issue, or just the next 4 pages and the next scene. Take it away.
Yep. Okay, so this next scene jumps us straight over to the Monitor's satellite, which, as the Anti-Monitor was gloating a moment ago, is in the throes of destruction. The Anti-Monitor didn't even need, as he further gloated, to use any definite weaponry to cause this problem. He just kind of reached out with his mind and whatever superior demiurgic antimatter powers he has, and the thing's starting to crush like a soda can. Inside, we have an assortment of the Monitor's champions from Earths 1 and 2 gathered together by Alex Luthor for a further mission, which will occupy them for the rest of this issue. But first, they have to save themselves, and that's what's going on in these 4 pages. We see a little bit of interaction between the various denizens of Earths 1 and 2 as they struggle for their lives. We see Starfire. We see the man called Steel, Henry Haywood III of the Detroit Justice League. We see the Earth 2 Hawkman and his godson Norda, alias Northwind of Infinity Inc. Pariah's there. Alex Luthor is there, of course. Harbinger is there. John Jones, Katana, a mysterious winged figure who has popped up in Wolfman and Perez's New Teen Titans, but has not been named as yet. Eventually he'll be called Azrael. The Earth 2 Flash, Jay Garrick, Block of the Legion of Superheroes, Changeling of the Titans, Cole Weathers, ally of the Titans who has the power to generate crystal, the Black Canary of Earth 1 in the new costume that Peter mentioned earlier on. Supergirl is there, and the Earth 1 Wonder Woman is there. and they're all just kind of tumbling through space, helping each other, protect each other from harm. Throughout these 4 pages, we get a little bit of character dialogue, a little bit of friction of personalities. As Alex Luthor does what he can to struggle to hold the satellite together, he warns everyone inside not to abandon ship because there's nothing but void outside. Meanwhile, Pariah vanishes, suggesting that something even worse is happening elsewhere, somewhere in creation. Meanwhile, Pariah senses Alex Luthor's intent to sacrifice himself, if necessary, to save the satellite and or its inhabitants, and she sees another sacrifice she can make to maybe make Alex's sacrifice unnecessary. So she knocks him out, just blasts him with some energy, and she leaves the safety of the satellite to do something else. And by her action, she's able to, well, we don't learn this immediately, but she does save the lives of all those aboard, and then the satellite itself is forever destroyed in a massive asteroidal-shaped explosion at the bottom of page 6. And that's our 4 pages of disaster drama for this scene.
Just because I'm sure listeners picked it up at one point. You talked about Pariah and then said something about Pariah notices Alexander Luthor. You meant Harbinger.
I meant Harbinger, yes. I'm sorry.
Just wanted to make sure.
So many names to toss out.
Yeah. And this is a direct connection to something, to the gathering of these characters, although we only saw a few of them in issue 5, as Alexander Luthor brought them, as you said, for another mission.
Mm-hmm. It's like a second summoning. Some symmetry with issue 1.
Exactly. I'll start with my notes this time. I have just sort of a few things. You talked about the inner dialogue, the interplay of some of these characters. I think Wolfman's, the way he handles Block, in the middle of this turmoil, he's like, excuse me, can you help me, please? It's great. It's a very spot on personification for the character. And I think he does that well with a lot of the other ones. Changeling's humor, for instance, talking about beautiful girls surrounding him. He knows that character intimately. Right. So, and you can tell he's not afraid to put a lot of his own characters at the forefront, whether it's Starfire, whether it's Changeling, as you said, including Azrael, including Cole. Just seems very odd, but those are his characters. So
his prerogative, I guess. He's the maestro here.
Yeah. And these pages as a whole also act, I think, as some exposition, right? We got to drop information about what they're supposed to be doing, what they should be doing, names, power sets, explain Harbinger one more time, explain Alexander Luthor one more time, even if he's not supposed to save the day now. It's just, I think it's Wolfman's way of kind of bringing us up to speed in this, for this issue, even though it is issue 6. You never know, might be somebody's first issue. So,
If in those days you couldn't assume that everybody had been following the story to that point, you couldn't always find the issues of comics that you wanted to read.
Yeah. So those are some of my general notes. I have some more specific notes. What do you think of this scene?
What do I think of it? Well, I think it's just a little bit of entertaining chaos. It's a little excuse to strike some sparks between the characters and create a little more excitement and action and drama, which is important to keep the reader invested. Let's see. My notes tend to go more into the minutiae.
Okay.
Just reminding the listener that this is all happening. The Monitor satellite, as it's under attack by the Anti-Monitor, is hovering in the Netherverse, which is this little pocket universe, this blank white void. A little visually visually easy to confuse with the white wall of antimatter, but no, this is a place called the Netherverse, which the Monitor created out of his own life energy and essence when he allowed Harbinger to strike him down. Through that sacrifice, he was able to create this little pocket universe, this Netherverse, which now contains the entire contents of the Earth 1 and Earth 2 universes and his own satellite. And it's a little bit similar, just to flash forward a couple of decades here, to the Overvoid, created by Grant Morrison as kind of the home realm of the Monitors, as he re-envisioned them during the Final Crisis event. much, much later. Yep. And then goings on the Monitor satellite. It's just, yep. I agree with what you said about his use of block. There's another cool moment with block coming up later on Earth 4 that I'll be mentioning when we get to it.
Yeah, I like that what you said about the reference to Morrison. I have a Morrison note for a later page that I don't think we'll get to in this episode, but when I get to it, if I forget to acknowledge you're bringing that up, make sure you remind me. A lot of the examples of the the spitting out all the exposition, Azrael calling Martian Manhunter Martian, but then saying, I will save this outsider, so it's like things like that I get it. It's I think that's why it's an 80s comic.
Comes off a little stiff, but it reminds the reader who these characters are and where they're coming from.
Yeah. And in a larger context, though, we are getting examples of pretty much a lot of the prime top tier titles at DC. Certainly the Titans, certainly Legion. Outsiders was very popular. All-Star Squadron, Justice League Detroit. I thought it was interesting that he's picking some real movers and shakers,
Like all the major teams that DC had at the time. Infinity Inc. in there too.
Yep.
No Omega Men, but they do pop up eventually.
Yeah. But yet characters like Wonder Woman, the Earth 1 Wonder Woman, doesn't get a lot of screen time. And we've talked about that before, about how many of the big characters, if you want to just call the big three or the big Justice League 7, outside of Flash, and we will see Aquaman later on, and Martian Manhunter's here, but they don't, it feels like Wolfman is very much paying attention to, they have their titles, they have their fans, they have their moments. This is about the larger DC universe, and it doesn't always start with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, at least not in the 80s, the way it does maybe now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and I've remarked several times before in the course of this podcast how happy I am that Wolfman took that approach to, this didn't allow this to become just a Superman story or a Batman story or even a Justice League story. It's a DC Universe title, and everybody gets to bear his, her, their share of the protagonism of the plot.
Page 4, that panel with Changeling and Cole, Supergirl, and Wonder Woman. Not to throw spoilers, but of the 5 characters in that, only 2 survive by the end of this. Isn't that crazy?
That is a good point. Of course, as we've mentioned before, one of those 5 characters was actually specifically built to be sacrificed in this story, just in the interest of fair play on Wolfman's part.
This is, again, another scene where I feel like Tom Zucco, the new colorist, is really taking advantage of coloring, especially on page number 5, where you see Harbinger just looking at Alexandra Luthor there on panel 3, and the chaos surrounding her is reflecting on her face in the original issue. There's a lot of uses of just color washes and to set mood and atmosphere, which we'll find later on as well, but it's starting to seep in here. And a lot of that gets washed out in the collections.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up again on page 4, when Pariah does his involuntary blink out at the bottom of page 4. In the original issue, Zuko colors that in just whites with some blue outlines, where you really get the impression of Pariah fading. He turns pale white, goes like ghostly, phantasmal, and then blinks away. In the collection, the blue is replaced with green, which I do like because it's Pariah's signature color, but that panel where you see his face and his outstretched hand fading to white as he blinks away, that's replaced with flesh tone and lavender for the hair. Like it fully colors in Pariah's character, which kind of loses Zuko's original intent in allowing that to be just a whitewash.
We don't ever really find out where Pariah goes, do we?
Not immediately, but I think we can assume it's to one of the 3 parallel Earths. In fact, don't we see him again before the issue is over?
No, I don't think we do. I think he zaps out of this issue from here on out. It's just everybody noticing Harbinger. in the antimatter wall.
Hmm.
So
flipping through here, you're right. He doesn't pop up again, at least not in this issue.
no, so we'll have to. And I think I remember where he shows up in issue 7, and it's just sort of like he's back again. So, let's see, page 5. Makes sense that Harbinger would know that Alexander isn't the right man for this job. As a being who can split herself into many, part of her power must also be to draw them all together, just like she wants to do with the Earth. So it makes sense that she would be the one to maybe tackle this situation, drawing in the multiple universes and their worlds. Alexander, at this point, we just know he's positive and negative. So,
Yep. Matter and antimatter in one man.
Yeah. So I thought it was a good call. I thought, Harbinger's has, at least in this series, has, even I think before she was taken over by one of the shadow demons, has shown a certain brusqueness, a certain, I don't want to say haughty, there's there's a presence to her.
Imperiousness.
Yeah. So is it a little extreme that she zaps him? Sure. But she's getting a job done, and maybe time is of the essence.
Yep, there's no time to lose. And check out all the headshots down at the bottom of page 5.
Oh, love it.
I realize this. If you look at them from top to bottom and left to right, they're actually in alphabetical order.
Perez was a master of that. Did it often. Would do it in Titans every now and then. I've noticed in a couple other places. He loves to do alphabetical arrangements like that. You have to, when you go through it, like you said, you go up and down. You have to go from Hawkman to John Jones, not Martian
Right,
Manhunter.
as opposed to Martian Manhunter. But
yeah. And same thing with Cole and Luthor as opposed to Alexander Luthor. But he was, all the many hours I've spent going through the Titans books, every now and then I go, oh, look, that's in alphabetical order. So maybe that's just his way of making sure he gets everybody in. But what a great example of their faces, and just, you really could show somebody, what does Starfire's face look like? There you go. And really good at trying to delineate, make him look different. Not there might be certain characteristics between them, but
that's definitely his Starfire, though. It's just that soft, almost babyish chin line. Oh, well, one coloring boo-boo we have to ascribe to Zuko, though. Wonder Woman in the lower right, her hair is kind of a purplish gray, like she's the Earth 2 Wonder Woman suddenly. And that was corrected in the hardcover collection. Her hair is colored black.
You get on page 6 more, I think, a different and a more in-depth look at Harbinger's powers. A power created from the mind, all the untapped cerebral powers released in one being.
Solidified manifestation, created reality, tortured prose. That's one of the poorest written captions in the whole story, in my opinion.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Solidified manifestation, created reality. What does that even freaking mean? Come on, Marv.
Solidified manifestation, created reality. All the universe in one being. She returns to her mechanical womb where her earthly body awaits. Yeah, it's a callback to, again, if I want to play with these parallels, when in the first issue, The Summoning, where she was Lyda and Lila. Lyda? Oh, God.
Lila.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. I'm getting my characters mixed up. And Harbinger says, all right, it's time to be Harbinger, or whatever he says. And she goes down as Lila into this womb. It's the same design, more or less, and out explodes Harbinger, but the earthly body is trapped in the middle. Now you have Harbinger going in there to the earthly body. She must know that there's power there to be had to use for what she's going to do, I guess, right? Like, and I don't know, is that what he means by all of that? Solidified created reality. because the harbingers are the creations.
I
Right?
guess he's saying that Harbinger is just a psychic projection from Lila's true body.
Right. Yeah. And at this point, there is only one harbinger, whereas in issue 1 there was multiple ones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very much the physical personification. That's a oxymoron, I guess, or a redundant. She's the personification of the multiverse. When there should be one, there was many. So she's almost like a literal character version of the multiverse. So
Yep, and she has to recombine and consolidate in order to survive and face the challenge ahead of her.
yeah, so I just took note of that. I just thought it was an interesting purple prose, I guess you can call it.
Purple prose, purple prose.
And then the monitor satellite is forever destroyed, which is no. I mean, even by the end of this end of this series, and we've seen it multiple times since then. So a version still exists somewhere.
Right, still in use today. I think they call it the Hall of Heroes or something like that. It's home of a multiversal Justice League kind of thing. That I think Morrison was the one who first put it together during his Multiversity.
The thing in the middle of the Multiversity map. I think that's the Hall of Heroes. I'll look it up.
Whatever it is, it looks very much like the Monitor's old satellite, and it's run by an AI of Harbinger.
Oh. Yeah, here it is. House of Heroes. It's
House of Heroes. Okay.
It almost looks like the and then on other points are the Rock of Eternity and the Orrery of Worlds are like the diamond point or the triangle points. Or no, I'm sorry. It's the Rock of Eternity and whatever's on the other side. That's something else different. But it almost looks like the H dial. That's not the last time I'll come to that Multiversity map. Maybe not this episode, but later.
I do like the shape of the explosion in page 6. It's any Pittsburgh sports fans out there. It kind of reminds me of the hypocycloids on the Steelers logo.
All right. That's all I had for that sequence. Where are we going to next? I guess we can do the next 2 pages.
Yep, just a quick check-in with certain cast members in the respective universal spaces of Earth 2 and Earth 1. First, on page 7, on page 7, we get to Earth 2, some very human drama because after the injuries he sustained in battle in issue 5, the Ted Grant Wildcat has his legs all bandaged up, and his old pal Al is taking him into, and I'm assuming this is Ted Grant's own apartment that Al is taking him to and putting him to bed there. He's in bad shape. His speaking he's speaking haltingly, and Al tells him just what a great hero he is and how Al has personally been inspired by Wildcat's example. And outside on the windowsill, we see a young woman named Yolanda Montez, whom we met briefly in issue 5 also. Here we finally get some acknowledgement that Ted and Yolanda knew each other. This is something that Roy Thomas knew all along because he created Yolanda Montez. I don't think Wolfman had quite gotten the memo about that as of issue 5, but here he's making up for lost time and Yolanda's thinking to herself about how important Ted Grant has been to her in her life too, and the fact that she happens to have special abilities that she's now making plans to use to honor Ted's legacy. And so that's a little bit of human drama there. Al Pratt excuses himself to go back and rejoin the fray, help to protect Earth 2. Meanwhile, on or around Earth 1, at the end of a confrontation, yet another confrontation with Superman in Superman Volume 1, number 413, as this little caption tells us, Lex Luthor in his battle armor is plucked from Earth by a teleportation beam, and he finds himself aboard the new Brainiac's skull ship, where Brainiac proposes a partnership between himself and the new Luthor that will, quote, make us both rulers of this universe. Whichever universe Brainiac thinks he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, Wolfman picking up on two threads. One that we've already seen with the destruction of Wildcat's legs, and one that has been going on kind of subtly in the background. These certain villains disappearing, and we're going to see more of that as we go. We saw Simon vanish in a very confusing panel that we talked about in, I don't even remember, was it issue 4 or 5? I can't remember. Where we weren't sure what was happening, if he was being, beaten by a shadow demon or his powers were going wonky, but apparently it was him being zapped away, to join this team. And now we got Luthor doing the same thing. So what do you think? What do you think of this Yolanda Montez thing? This is the second time we saw her in the last issue as well, introducing herself. So what do you think?
Right, and she says to Wildcat, "My name is Yolanda Montez. I am glad that I was able to help you." And as if they were strangers. I guess you could argue that she was doing that to preserve his secret identity or something, but it doesn't really add up. But here, Wolfman is like, "Oh yeah, she's his goddaughter basically," and her dad was a pro boxer and a good friend of Ted Grant's friend and colleague, and she's always looked up to him. And so here we have basically in parallel 2 characters who have looked up to Wildcat, and I'm not sure that Wolfman might be the first person to really latch onto this. I don't know if in prior Justice Society stories, any kind of a friendship or mentorship relationship between Atom and Wildcat had been explored, but it kind of makes sense since Al Pratt, as the Atom, first became a superhero when he was trained in the sweet science by a washed-up ex-prize fighter named Joe Morgan, I think. And so he's just a slugger. Before he got his atomic powers in 1947 or 48, that's all he was. He was just a short guy with a lot of muscle and a lot of scrap. So it makes sense that he and Ted Grant would have been friends, because Ted Grant, too, was basically just a guy who fought crime with his own 2 fists and his own sharp wits. Yeah, and their friendship was explored later in the early 90s in that Justice Society, the short-lived JS of A ongoing, written by Len Kaminsky, I think, art by Ty Templeton, I also think.
Or Mike Parabek? Oh, no,
Yeah, it was supposed to be an ongoing series spinning right out of what is it? Armageddon Inferno.
Okay.
Which is what brought the JSA back from the Ragnarok limbo, where they were stuck after Crisis. And yeah, Al Pratt and Wildcat palled around quite a bit in that series, as I recall. But here, Al Pratt is the only member of the JSA, curiously, that takes time out to deliver. They took the time to wrap bandages around Wildcat's legs, but didn't take the time to take his costume off.
I said the same thing.
It's a little strange.
I wonder if that's just Perez's shorthand to sort of say, yes, this is Wildcat. Who's going to know what he looks like without it, right? It's Wildcat.
The fact that he's being carried by a costume team, and he's being referred to by name, that would probably be enough.
Or just cut the bottoms off or something. Yeah,
right. And it's also a little weird to me that he's being taken to his apartment instead of to a hospital. He should probably be kept under observation after the trauma he suffered. But nope, just putting him to bed and then leaving. This is basically what Al is doing. Yeah. I wonder if he's doing this under his own recognizance. If maybe the other JSA, he was never the smartest member of the JSA, was Al Pratt. So maybe the others don't know what he's actually doing. But yeah, he's taking Ted, and we get some nice, touching, tender moments here between these 2 longtime teammates with a lot in common when you stop to think about it. And then as kind of a parallel counterpoint to that, we get Yolanda showing up barefoot. Important to notice, I guess, landing on Ted Grant's windowsill and musing about it. I guess we should be glad that she's there because, as I've said, Al is just leaving him there alone. So I guess she's going to be kind of his guardian angel, hanging out there on the windowsill for a little while until he drifts comfortably off to sleep. And there she is doing that 80s Latino American thing in comics where she says or thinks something in Spanish and then automatically translates herself for the reader's benefit. Un gran equipo, a great team.
So a couple things. I looked up that volume of Justice Society of America from 1992. It was Len Straczewski, as you said. Mike Parabek was the artist. And Mike Macklin was the inker, who was an inker over Jerry Ordway for Infinity or All-Star Squadron, I think, and maybe Infinity Inc. as well, or one or the other. That volume only lasted 10 issues. So. And you've read that All-Star Squadron annual from 1982, where Joe Morgan was the trainer of Atom, Wildcat, and Guardian, right? Where they mixed up.
They all turned out to be the same person.
Right.
Just Roy Thomas identifying a repeated trope in a lot of Golden Age origin stories and decided to condense them all into one.
Which totally makes sense. I mean, so as you said, it's kind of nice to see that Atom and Wildcat are, they have that thing. In fact, you even see a boxing trophy on that panel right there where Atom is bringing Wildcat into the apartment. I assume it's his apartment, Wildcat, and you can see there's like a little trophy next to the lamp, which is kind of cool. So this is a legacy scene, right? It's everything that Wolfman said he's been wanting to do, and we've already seen it with Dr. Light turning a villain into a hero, quote unquote, because it's not the same character.
Right.
But making her a Japanese woman. And now we're getting a legacy character with a little bit closer ties to the original character. Again, making it going from a man to a female, and this time a Spanish woman. Or I'm not sure if I think she's Mexican, I think.
I'm pretty sure, yes.
Yeah.
Mexican descent.
So, I wrote here, okay, this is exactly what Wolfman is planning. Expansion, change, diversity, right? It's everything.
Yep, well before such things became fashionable in mass media.
Yeah. And it made me wonder, and especially, obviously, again, we're not going to get to the end of the issue in this chapter, but when we get the reveal of where this goes, it did also make me think, okay, wait a minute. Wolfman he very much, like you even mentioned in your thesis or from the companion, that Wolfman wanted to reboot the DC universe by the end of the Crisis, right? So does introducing a legacy character or the potential for a legacy character mean that at this point that rebooting was off the table? Or, why introduce a legacy character unless he thought, had he got his way and we got this new Earth, in a couple more issues, that this Wildcat would just be the Wildcat without any connection to Ted Grant? You know what I mean? Like, you sort of introduce the legacy aspect first, but then
in the specific case of Yolanda Montez, Roy Thomas actually came up with her a couple of years before this.
Well, right. Okay. Right. Yeah. I just mean like the usage of her. How do we balance it with Wolfman's desire to, I guess one of the questions I wrote in my notes is, by issue 6, was the idea of rebooting the universe thrown out? Like, they were like, no, we can't do that, So he's like, all right, this is a way to do a legacy character and still sort of get a reboot, but not the way he intended it to. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure if he saw that writing on the wall by this stage yet or not, but we're halfway through the entire Maxi series here, after all. Right. So I get the feeling he probably did, to get the impression that he wouldn't be able to make quite as sweeping a change to the DC status quo as he had hoped he would. Yeah, that he probably would. There was just too much pushback to his restarting everything from ground zero.
Right. Yeah, because I just thought, like, okay, you can make that connection, but then if you start with Justice Society of America issue number 1 post Crisis, and they're like, hey, the Wildcat in this universe has been and always will be female, right? And there never was a Ted Grant. I wondered if he like thought about those kind of things, but we'll never know. That's like a mystery. We shouldn't make reference to, you mentioned her creation by Roy Thomas. She was going to be two other characters, apparently a character named Lynx. And then there was a shot of Infinity Inc., like a promo shot in All-Star Squadron.
Yes, when she was going to be called La Gara, I believe.
Yeah, an orange version of Wildcat riding a cat cycle. So this character has had many a jump start, and then finally we'll see what happens to her by the end of this issue.
And then we have page 8, which is, well, the first meeting, if I'm not mistaken. It's Luthor's reaction to the new Brainiac certainly suggests that it's the first meeting between the new Luthor and the new Brainiac, since they were both introduced in Action Comics number 544 in 1983.
Which I was surprised. I had to look that up because I thought, first of all, I thought they met in that story, but then I forgot that it was two stories in one issue. And they didn't meet. And why would they meet? Because Brainiac was off in space with the whole master programmer thing, and rarely came back to Earth. And so, yeah, I thought that was surprising myself when I read that dialogue. So kudos for whoever was the research person that, or if that was Wolfman. Well, I guess that would have been Wolfman. Didn't he write those stories, those action stories? Were they?
That's a good question.
I think he did.
I don't think he wrote both of them.
No. Let me look it up.
All right. So, yeah, you said that it was Perez who designed the new Luthor battle armor, which he acquired in that issue.
Correct.
And it was Ed Hannigan, I'm pretty sure, who came up with the new Brainiac design.
Correct. Oh, nope. It was Carrie Bates. Carrie Bates wrote that story.
Okay. Did he write both of them, or?
Oh, wait. Superman Rebirth, the one with Brainiac was Marv Wolfman and Gil Kane.
All right. Were they the Action Comics ongoing creative team at that time?
I think Marv Wolfman definitely was. Let's see. Because the next couple issues with Brainiac is Marv Wolfman and Gil Kane. So.
Yep, I know that is kind of a favorite underappreciated run of yours.
Yeah. Titans are in it. Hydra's and the Omega Men show up every now and then. Wolfman just throwing all his characters all over these comics.
And in the meantime, trying to do some different and somewhat progressive things with Superman, which, well, didn't come to much, obviously.
Right. I love Brainiac's headship. It is so DC Universe. It's just that huge satellite with the tentacles at the end of it.
Yes, the tentacles.
It's fantastic. It's like the Monitor satellite come to life. It's fantastic.
Little hex cells on the scalp made of little hex cells.
And I have to say, I do like the recoloring that they did in the. I was looking at the Absolute Crisis, which probably takes the same coloring.
Yeah. I don't think they changed very much between the 1998 trade packaging and the Absolute edition. I think they just blew it up.
Right.
There were one or two glaring mistakes from that hardcover that they had to correct, but other than that, they just kind of went with what they had done in '98. I see what you mean though about the recoloring though. It's more purely, it's pure silver, pure metallic, without so much of the pink and purple highlights.
It seems to have like a flare, like a lens flare kind of design to coloring to effect, I should say.
Yep.
It feels like it's something moving in space, which I like. And it's just nice to see a bigger panel because Perez has been using a lot of smaller panels to date outside of the splash page. So we're kind of opening up to show the grandeur of that headship. And we should make note that this is, we're getting a lot of footnotes now, right? Like here we're starting to see the Crisis saying, okay, some stories are going to spin out from here now. Like we're finally starting to see it. I wrote down, I think this is the third one. The one on the page before with Infinity Inc. is the second one, and there was one from a previous issue so far. So now they're starting to, it took us 5 and 6 issues to really say, hey, you're reading this. Now go read everything else.
Yes. Even including these things that don't really have that much to do with this story. Go out and read them anyway, because that's what Superman 413 is.
Right.
Yes, I remember. I picked up a copy of that many years ago and discovered that it was a story that had nothing to do with Crisis, except that Luthor mysteriously disappeared at the end.
Yeah.
In the wake of yet another failed scheme to bring Superman to his knees.
And to be fair, I mean, they do say that he's fleeing from Superman. So, and they're saying basically, if you want to know what's going on, check out this issue. But it's part in story, but it's also very much promotion, right? Like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's an issue that doesn't even come out for another couple months after this issue. So it hadn't even shipped yet. So they're saying, it's coming.
Yeah, let's see here. Cover date November of 85. And this is September. So, yep, you're absolutely right.
And if we haven't said it, this is all setting up the villain war, which will happen in the start of Act 3.
Yep, all these vanishing villains are Brainiac recruiting his foot soldiers for an invading army that will conquer 3 Earths.
Let me go back to the previous page just real quick, just a couple things here. So Adam takes Wildcat back to Earth 2, but he was injured on Earth 1. I would love to know how they're going back and forth.
It's a very good catch.
Yeah. Yolanda Montez, even though she has been previously seen in Infinity Inc. number 12, she's a Roy Thomas creation. I feel like at least what she becomes feels very much like a Crisis character, in sort of in the vein of like Lady Quark, Dr. Light, Alexander Luthor. I feel like she's not quite on that level, but when I think of the Crisis and in terms of Marv Wolfman's plan of who got introduced, Wildcat is this character, this Yolanda Montez, is like a very strong image for me, a very strong memory.
It's one that people tend to overlook, I think. Possibly because, as we've said, groundwork had been laid for her by Roy Thomas for some time before this. But she did technically, make her big widescreen debut here as a part of the Crisis story.
And look, she's on the Stargirl TV show to this, I mean, so it's like a character that has not longevity, but they certainly like, look, let's use this character. I mean, it makes sense, and so that's kind of cool. I find that neat, and I also like the we're starting to see the gap in, especially with all these footnotes, right? Like this whole story started several months after where DC's line really was. So if you were reading Crisis number 1, it was July of 1985. If you were reading the Batman book when Crisis 1 came out, it was probably March 85, or January 85 even. So I feel like, we will see better examples of this later, where the characters have evolved because they need them to do so in Crisis before they do in their own book. Or, whether it's a costume change, whether it's a personality thing or whatever. So, and this is kind of like an example of that, I think. If that makes sense.
Sure.
And then last thing here, the solo panel of Al Pratt, where he's just looking at Wildcat there, and what is his dialogue?
Ted Grant I grew up with was a fighter, not only because he was a boxer, but because he fought to live in a harsh and cruel world. You taught puny Al Pratt a lot, Ted.
I feel like I love the background coloring, the green. It's kind of like Al Pratt's will being put on Wildcat.
The emotional spectrum seeping in.
I see it everywhere these days when I read older DC comics. Prior to Blackest Night and prior to John's, it's obviously all coincidental, but there's several other moments where I'm like, look, there it is. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay. Where are we heading next? We're going to pages 9, 10, and 11.
Mm-hmm. All of which are set on the first of the three remaining besieged parallel Earths. This one being Earth X.
Your favorite?
Mm, I wouldn't say my favorite.
One of your favorites.
It's one of my infinity favorite Earths in the DC continuum. But yeah, I like Earth X just fine.
Okay.
Yes, a world that was originally shown as the home of the quality comics superhero characters that DC had bought, but then Roy Thomas later retconned it as a parallel Earth which had no native-born superheroes. It needed to import some from Earth 2 to fight the Nazi menace, and even that was not enough because the Nazis turned the tide and ended up basically taking over the world. We're told in the first caption at the top of page 9 here, Earth X, a world whose second major war lasted more than 40 years. Earth X in the throes of its final conflict. And the white wall of antimatter is upon it. And then in pops the Earth X away team of the Monitor's latest group of champions, people we last saw aboard the imploding Monitor satellite. We get from Earth 2, Hawkman and his godson, Northwind. And from Earth 1, Kimio Hoshi, the new Dr. Light, Steel, and Starfire. They pop up on the roof of a building, and they have to jump into action almost immediately. They see a giant energy image of Harbinger just kind of hovering there mysteriously right in front of the antimatter wall, or the antimatter fray, as it starts to be called in captions throughout this issue. And then they notice a throng of Earth Xers who are inexplicably racing headlong into the antimatter wall or fray. The heroes catapult themselves into action to save these people from themselves when the freedom fighters show up in the grip of deadly fear, not acting like themselves, striking out in panic and paranoia and instinctively attacking these heroes who have just come to try and help them. And so a battle breaks out between the freedom fighters and this little collection of heroes. Which lasts a couple of pages here. Dr. Light uses a hard light barrier to try to keep the rank and file citizenry of Earth X from jumping into the antimatter, but the ray stops her. And then at the bottom of page 11, we check in for two quick panels with Psycho Pirate and Anti-Monitor back in the Antimatter universe. And from there, we ricochet off to another parallel Earth. But first, let's talk a little more about this little scene on Earth X.
Yeah, freedom fighters. Now, I know you do like the freedom fighters.
I do. Yeah. I really do.
All right. You want to talk about this first? Take your notes on this?
Okay. Well, let's see what I got here. Let's see. I don't think I... Oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. On page 9 here, as the heroes... pop in on Earth X. There's a little bit of a confusing, a little bit of a lettering snafu here, where Hawkman appears to make a remark and then answer himself. In the trade collection, that word balloon that says, obviously on Earth, it's the crux point of the crisis. The tail of that balloon is lengthened to point right down at Northwind in the trade collection, to attribute that comment to him, and then Earth 2 Hawkman is answering him. But the question these days, Northwind, is which Earth?
That's interesting. You know, I have that in my notes initially, and then I sort of justified it this way, because I thought when they zapped in, they said, someone says, what happened? Where are we? So I thought, okay, if you make that Northwind, he says, where are we?
Then both those word balloons can be Carter Holt.
Yeah, right. It kind of makes sense then that he would say, well, obviously, yeah. So I'm not sure which one is more. I think it flows better this way than the correction, the quote unquote correction, but I don't know.
Yeah, I could go either way.
Okay.
Let's see what else. Oh yeah, Dr. Light suddenly gains the ability to understand English, so that's Wolfman kind of writing himself a pass out around Dr. Light's Japanese English language barrier. Yeah, because Norda muses that sounds like either that Luthor kid or Harbinger did something to you, Light. One thing for sure, it'll certainly simplify things. Yeah. I don't know. I don't get the feeling that Wolfman gets Norda's voice quite right. He uses a little too much slangy English for him. I mean, this is a guy who is only half human and lived his entire life up until maybe a year ago in universe time in a hidden city of bird people up in Greenland. He hasn't picked up that much, American English vernacular.
Yeah, I give Wolfman credit for using him as kind of the point man in these few panels,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right. I feel like he almost feels like he's writing him as a substitute for, say, like Cyborg, just because they're both black characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you're right, because I noticed that too, and I said Northwind is much more contemplative. He's almost like Block in a way,
Mm.
quiet, shy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost compare him to Marvel's Vision, although he's not an android, obviously, but he's
So
yeah,
so I sort of get that he would throw himself maybe into the front of those people. Like that feels right. But you're right. I think the dialogue is not Wolfman's. He didn't capture it as strong as
right.
he as other characters.
But I agree with your point too, though, that I like what Wolfman has him doing. It's just what he's saying as he's doing it that rings a little false.
Because I feel the same way. I feel what he really excels with the freedom fighters because of the language they use. Like that dolt. And I reckon it's a little stereotypical, but that feels right for the freedom fighters. Like I feel like he does capture them very well.
Well,
And
yeah,
if
well, Uncle Sam's dialogue should be a little stereotypical, really, because
Mhm.
he kind of is a living, walking stereotype, an icon of the American fighting spirit. He's that more than he is an actual human being. So yeah, he can be as corny as the writer wants to make him.
And like for the Ray to say that dolt and Black Condor villain, now they are under the sway of an emotional, vampire or whatever you want to call him. But it's so the heightened language makes sense. But I did take note that the dialogue felt quote unquote correct for the freedom fighters. It was fun dialogue.
Yep, fun indeed. Let's see, a
Anything
little
else?
real micro detail at the top of page 10 as the first panel as Norda is descending to street level. You can kind of see between his legs a little kid wearing like a newsboy cap on his head. I'm just looking at the Perez's fashion choices in these crowd scenes. I'll have another thing to say about that on Earth S a little bit later on, but I don't think too many kids were wearing hats like that in 1985 on Earth Prime, but on Earth X, since World War II lasted 40 years longer. I mean, you got to think there's got to be a lot of changes in culture in general, a lot of things that evolved very differently on that Earth than they would have in the real world or even on Earth 1. And so pork pie hats still being fashionable after, 40 years after they were at their peak is just, I'm thinking of that as like an Earth X fashion statement that Perez is making. Whether he actually had that in mind when he drew that kid in that panel, I have no idea, but I'd like to think that he did. Like
That's a
maybe this is what kids are wearing in a world where World War II raged on for 40 years and the Nazis took over everything.
I Adam, I think that's an absolute spot on observation that I did not think about. And because we've seen other instances of this. We've seen like when they went to Earth 6, for example, with Lady Quark's world, where it was a
Mhm.
totally different, not only in costuming, but even heights and technology.
Mhm.
Um, the very first opening disaster scene of Crisis Issue #1, which is like an unnamed Earth, right? Like
Mhm.
it feels very modern. It feels like 1980s costuming, which feels different. Because I was wondering, I was like, oh, that woman with the umbrella. That's kind of funny that she's using her umbrella, but maybe that is, it feels antiquated to me, but maybe it's not. Maybe I think you're right. I think that's great. I love that notion. Hairstyles, even too. Like somebody's wearing a headband. Somebody's wearing the in the second panel, the woman with the red hair looks like it looks like a different hairstyle than
Mhm.
older, maybe more cropped to the head. So
Right? It's a little unusual, but like I said, 40 years of continuous warfare will tend to retard development in things like fashion.
right.
People had other things to worry about.
Speaking of that 40 years, because they mentioned that in the narration on page 9. Um, so we got the Freedom Fighters series that ended. Let's see.
It
in
began in
78.
76. I know that. And yeah,
Okay.
it would have ended in 78 after like 14 issues, I think, 14 or 15 as part of the DC implosion.
Hmm. And then they did appear in DC Comics Presents with Superman in 1983 in issue number 62, where they came to Earth 1.
Well, yeah, well, that's what their ongoing series in the late 70s was. They had left Earth X behind
Oh,
because
right.
the Nazi war machine had been halted, Earth was at peace, and there was a scene of them just sitting around their headquarters looking bored. Uncle Sam was flipping pinochle cards into his top hat. That's how bored he was. So they went to a scientist friend of theirs and got him to teleport them to Earth 1 to try and to find some exciting new adventures.
Right. Right.
Didn't really make an awful lot of sense when you think about it. I mean, they've got a whole world to rebuild. Why are they joyriding off to Earth 1?
Right. And we talked about it in the previous issue too, where, again, that gap in time where Wolfman has sort of extrapolating these characters and saying, okay, Earth X is done with that war. Because it even says, I think it was in issue 5 where it says it's a world now being restored or something like that, whatever word you just used too.
Yep. So, we're not sure how much time actually passed, in comic book time between 1976 when the Freedom Fighters left Earth 1 and 1985 when these events are taking place for us.
Right. But and they don't really touch on it too much, but I mean, you sort of get the sense that this is post-war, possibly, especially because they're zapping into Earth 1, so.
Yeah. That much is, I think that much was determined even in the Freedom Fighters' first appearance as a team in Justice League number 100 and something, 117, I'm not sure, 107. I don't know the exact issue number, but the JLA and JSA helped the Freedom Fighters to bring World War II to a close finally on Earth X.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it was sometime after that the Freedom Fighters got bored and decided, hey, let's day trip over to Earth 1 for a while and see if there's any crime there we can help stop.
I've never read that Justice League issue, so I'll have to read that. Does Commander Steel have any ties to the Freedom Fighters at all outside of All-Star Squadron? I don't think so, right?
No.
So,
well, I guess one thing they have in common is they were both introduced after a fashion in the 70s.
I was trying to make connections of why these certain characters were together, but nothing really. I mean, outside of Northwind and Hawkman having a family connection, Steel having a loose connection because of who his grandfather is, they don't quite. None of these pairings really mean anything. Like, sometimes I usually can find some things in these kind of groupings, but I had a little bit of a hard time with that. So I just took random. That's why I asked the question about Steel and Freedom Fighters.
Yep. Well, they're both latter-day Bronze Age extrapolations of the Golden Age superhero fighting spirit. Yeah, because 40s retro was kind of a thing towards the end of the 70s.
Some art things, the team pose for the Freedom Fighters, not as good as the previous issue, but doesn't need to be. It's totally fine. When Northwind gets hit, he kind of breaks the panel that he's in. His foot breaks the panel. I think his wing does too, but it was probably just cut off during the printing process. So I love that. That's a very Perez thing.
Yes, it is. Perez dynamism.
Yeah.
And good point about the Freedom Fighters not posing quite as heroically here on page 10, but they're too scared to pose properly.
Yeah. And lots of thought balloons, not only in this chapter but in the next sort of sequence too, or is it this one that I'm referencing? Which I was trying to think of, like, we've been getting that, right? We've been getting inner thoughts of characters a lot. It's not always been narration.
Absolutely, yes.
And especially at this point in the crisis where they have more knowledge and they have a mission, right? Like they have a mission that they're doing now. I don't know. For some reason, you read current comics, you don't get a lot of, if any, thought balloons. So when I was reading them again for this episode, I was like, oh, yeah, right. Look, wow, there's a lot of them.
Yep, this used to happen all the time.
Yeah.
Yes. And speaking of thought balloons, when Carter Hall in the middle of page 10 is thinking to himself in the middle of the battle, these thoughts are brought to us by Roy Thomas in a couple of ways. I think it's reflecting a couple of notes that he passed to Wolfman recently. For one thing, Hawkman is making sure to inform the reader that Northwind is his son, technically his godson. His biological father is Fred Cantrell, an ornithologist who is an old friend of Carter Hall's. But Carter is definitely his godson and feels a paternal affection for him and protective instinct towards him. But then in the very next balloon, he's thinking, but I know the freedom fighters, they were all originally from Earth 2. So there's Wolfman being informed of this, that the original idea with the freedom fighters was that they were just heroes from Earth X, but then Roy Thomas pulled a retcon in All-Star Squadron, issues 31 through 35, in which he establishes that there are, in fact, no native heroes of Earth X, and just as a kind of a retroactive naturalization project for all of the Quality Comics characters, he decided that they all had lives and hero careers on Earth 2, along with all of DC's own homegrown heroes from the Golden Age. Because I think partly because he just wanted them all to interact. He wanted to throw, like the Phantom Lady and Plastic Man together with, Starman and all the others. And then it was finalized in All-Star Squadron number 50, which I think would have come out.
It will come out in another month or two.
Yep, in which we finally see the grand migration of all the Quality Comics heroes from Earth 2 to Earth X to stay, where I think we're supposed to assume a lot of them just died horrible deaths in war, to the point that only, Uncle Sam, the core group that we see here, Uncle Sam, Human Bomb, Ray, Dollman, Condor, Black Condor, and Phantom Lady, plus Firebrand. Let's not forget Firebrand. He does show up in a group shot with the rest of them later on. Are the only ones that are left by the time Justice League of America number 107 or whatever rolls around. Yeah. But yeah, so Wolfman has been informed that the Freedom Fighters are all from Earth 2, and he has Hawkman thinking that to himself as he flies in to his godson's rescue, wondering to himself, why are the Freedom Fighters acting like madmen? Why? And then one such madman swoops in and clocks someone in the jaw. Like one iconic bird hero versus another. Black Condor versus Hawkman.
And then Hawkman says later, heroes don't battle other heroes without reason. It's like, really? I mean...
Hasn't read very many Marvel comics lately, has he?
I even thought
it was kind of ironic, too.
Yeah, was it a subtle dig to Secret Wars at the time, Like,
oh, I like that. I like that.
Maybe? I don't know. And speaking of just sort of being vindictive, I thought the Anti-Monitor is just being really cruel right there. It's like, nonsense. You wanted this. Now you have 3. Like...
I had
Go ahead.
A note about page 2 of this issue where, Psycho Pirate is whining once again for his own world, and Anti-Monitor says, pirate on a world where life has evolved little from its amoebic state, you are its lowest specimen. It's like he's... abusing Psycho Pirate has almost become reflexive for the Anti-Monitor at this point. I think he just keeps the guy around because he enjoys watching and listening to him suffer.
Yeah. And we should make...
a little rectangle of black there with the white lettering on it, throwing us back to the antimatter universe for a minute. That's
and the panel
back to lettering techniques of earlier issues.
The panel borders are thicker, right? They're just to make sure they're a little different than.
Yeah.
And we should also make mention the whole journey through Earth X, and then we're going to go to Earth 4 and Earth S is DC's way of showing, they inherited these characters. They purchased some of these characters and not all of them, right? Like they absorbed them into it's almost doing what Harbinger does. Literally, she's doing what DC did by absorbing these characters, putting them on different Earths and sort of saying, we've gone through Earth 1 and 2 already. Oh, by the way, here are the other Earths. We're no longer going to have the Earths, but these characters are going to be part of a larger quilt.
Right. Appropriating them and assimilating them for their own survival. Because really, these character libraries, from Fawcett and Quality and Charlton, they probably would have just lain fallow and not. Their publishers had abandoned them pretty much. I mean, Fawcett for legal reasons, but also because the superhero part of their publishing empire had ceased to be profitable by the beginning of the 50s. And I'm pretty sure the same was true of Quality's superheroes. They were still publishing comics. I think they were mainly doing war comics by the time DC bought them out. So really, it is not a case of DC being predatory and snapping up, like wresting these superheroes from other publishers' hands. They were characters that were not being used and that DC, I guess, saw some value in, and so just picked them up, because otherwise they would have continued to languish in obscurity. So yeah, you're right, Peter. Harbinger, in grabbing up these universes and folding them into the mainstream DC universe, she's kind of doing what DC did for these characters and giving them a second chance at vitality and relevance.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading about Charlton. They were still publishing close up to this point, but their funds just ran out. Like
they were still around during the 70s. They were publishing like Beetle Bailey and stuff like that, but I don't think they had tried to publish original superhero content for quite some time. That's why the Charlton Bullseye came up. It was basically fans keeping the action heroes of Charlton going.
That's what I was going to mention, the action heroes. They were going to try to, I think you can actually find that online. Like they tried to put that book out, and it just wasn't going to happen. One last little thing. The word fear is being used a lot for this Earth. On page 9, the second to last panel, as they run towards the antimatter wall, the ground is colored yellow like fear. That's really stretching it, I know, but pay attention to the fear. The fear is interesting to me.
Oh,
so.
The fear is definitely important.
Yes. Any other notes for that sequence?
I did have here Starfire's little bit where she's saving Hawkman and zapping Black Condor on page 11. She's thinking to herself, if I've got to kill these heroes to save their whole world, I will. And that's very much in character. Not surprising, because Wolfman and Perez created Starfire, obviously, but they're just remembering her warrior roots here. She's so often played as childlike and innocent, but she was also a trained warrior and not afraid to kill where necessary. That's her ethos.
That's actually a good point, because Dr. Light sort of has the same notion, right? Instead of creating a wall of light, I should let them die. But her journey is going to be a lot different, right? Like, I feel like he has to do that because of what happens in issue 7.
Yep, right? He wants her to have an arc, so he needs to remind us that she still has a long way to go before she deserves to be called a hero.
Right.
Yep, she's just an extremely arrogant, misanthropic scientist right now.
All right, so now we're going to go to pages 12, 13, 14, which brings us to the staples, but we're going to hit the top row of panels on 15. And listeners, this is going to be the last segment for this episode. Mm-hmm. So we reached the halfway point. Yay! Hurrah! Take us to Earth 4.
All right. So using the terrified look and the triple globes in Psycho Pirate's eyes as a segue, we jump from page 11 to page 12, and from Earth X to Earth 4. Another one of the parallel Earths housing heroes DC purchased from another company, Charlton Comics in this case. And we see a team composed of, from Earth 1, Martian Manhunter, Katana, Block of the Legion, and we think the unnamed winged individual, later to be known as Azrael. He does mention on page 11 that he's a stranger to Earth 1, so maybe he came from some other Earth. Who knows? And also from Earth 2, the Earth 2 Flash, Jay Garrick. They're standing on a rocky outcropping in the midst of driving rain, watching as the antimatter wall sweeps across a rocky plain in somewhere in the American West. And it's kind of an interesting change of pace here that these heroes are witnessing the destruction of the Earth out in a barren, uninhabited landscape, as opposed to yet another city scene with throngs of other Earthers screaming, running for their lives, etc. But they do find themselves suddenly in confrontation with a few of the Earth 4 Charlton Comics action heroes arriving on the scene. The Blue Beetle shows up in his bug airship. Captain Atom flies at the assembled Earth 1 and 2 heroes with some atomic blasts. Nightshade and Peacemaker are standing there yelling. Katana gets ambushed by Judo Master, another Charlton character, having been flung forward through time from his native 1940s, mistaking her, being from the 1940s, a World War II combatant. He sees a Japanese woman and naturally assumes she's an enemy, and so a scuffle ensues there. The Flash has to run down Peter Cannon Thunderbolt and prevent him from committing suicide in the antimatter fray. And when we get to the top of page 15, where we will stop, we see the Blue Beetle and another Charlton hero, the Question, looking very Ditko-esque, surrounded by swirling mists up there in the cockpit of the Bug. Arguably the two most cerebral, mentally astute characters of the Charlton Comics library. Comparing notes on their current emotional state and how they realize it's unnatural, that something is being done to them to make them behave in this way and battle these heroes that are visiting their Earth and just trying to help them, but they can't do anything about it. And we leave them paralyzed with fear as that scene draws to a close.
Yeah. I want to hit some art things right away, if you don't mind.
Nope, never.
I love that Perez is taking the opportunity to also not only, I like your observation about we're not in a city, right? I just took it for granted that Alexander Luthor sent them or somebody sent them to where the Earth 4 heroes were, right? But I love that, yeah, you're right, it's not in a city. But that Perez is willing to take the chance of saying, let me draw a rain scene because, right? Probably not weather that you would get in this landscape, maybe. Maybe that's what he was showing, that weather was kind of running amok. But also allowing for some artistic things, great use of color in this sequence.
Definitely.
I don't mind the recoloring, but they obviously want to show a little more of the costume coloring in the trades.
Yeah, because the way Zuko's covered this scene, this scene and also the underwater scene that follows it, which we'll talk about in the next episode. I think both of them are somewhat the poorer for the recoloring for the trade because, as you said, they probably did want to emphasize the costume coloration and all of that, but Zuko deliberately makes everything look kind of washed out. And not surprising because these scenes are basically taking place underwater. This one's in the driving torrential downpour, and the next scene is literally underwater in Atlantis. And that's just the washed out, muted down effects that Zuko achieves in the original coloring brings that across very well. And it's much more atmospheric this way, and it's kind of lost with the color clarification that they apply for the 1998 collection.
Yeah, I especially love the very few panels that we get. On page 12, it's the top panel. On page 13, it's the second panel with Blue Beetle, and then the second to last panel with Katana. And then on page 14, the first panel on the bottom row with Flash and Azrael, where you can clearly see the coloring is mimicking lightning strikes.
Right, it's a light effect.
Yeah, you can almost feel like there's no sound effects, right? The only sound effects you get are when people scream in this sequence. So, kind of like the opening scene where the Monitor satellite is just crashing all around them. If you think a little bit larger outside of the two-dimensionality of comics, or there is real action going on. There's atmosphere, there's mood, there's sound effects going on. And those flashes are, I don't think I ever really noticed them before today. Like just really digging in and going, oh yeah, look, it's thunder, it's lightning crashes. This is, that is so great. I read Mr. Phil from the Indie Spinner Rack podcast.
Of course.
We text every now and then, and he said he came across a review in Amazing Heroes about Crisis and Born Again, and one of the comments was, that Perez wasn't doing epic artwork. He was just sort of sticking to his traditional. I love the face you're giving me.
I don't get that comment at all.
Tiny panels with the sequential stuff happening. And I'm like, Okay.
Small things happen in the middle of big events.
Yeah.
That's part of the appeal of the story and the way it is told.
And maybe it was Zuko's idea. Maybe it was Zuko's idea to say, "Oh, I see these lightning strikes. Well, let me color those panels for that."
Right.
But Perez is
Yes.
smart and Tom Zuko is smart. I feel like these are the examples of no, it's not Alex Ross. No, it's not widescreen comics, but widescreen comics weren't invented in the 80s. So
Yep, this is
it's
probably the first step evolutionarily towards what would be eventually thought of as widescreen comics right here.
yeah. I mean, we've been saying it for how many episodes now? Wolfman, Perez, and company are creating what event comics, the groundwork for event comics to become whatever it is you want them to be later. But I just thought that was an
Yes.
odd critique. Perez is not epic in his art.
Wonder
What?
what that guy thinks thought epic comics looked like in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
Fourth World, maybe? I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe they were
Yeah.
thinking it was too claustrophobic. I don't know.
Man, yeah, I absolutely agree with your remark about the lightning and the atmospheric light effects here, especially that Blue Beetle panel at the top of page 13, where there's not a scrap of blue on him, basically, because he's so washed out by the lightning next to him, and it's a thrilling effect. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And Zuko got his head out of the model sheets and dared to draw the character as he would appear in those light conditions. Meanwhile, for the trade, they recolored it so there's not even any lightning in that panel, and the Blue Beetle
Oh.
just appears in his normal costume colors. It's infinitely poorer.
And this is the introduction of these characters outside of Blue Beetle to the DC universe. I mean, this is
Right.
and they're willing to take the chance to say, you know what, we're not really going to show you the coloring of the way that you would in like a Who's Who or something like that. We're going to take a little leeway into
Yep.
being something more.
We're gonna go with the settings and the conditions under which this scene is happening.
Yeah,
Let
I mean that
naturalism take control.
that shot of Jay Garrick on the bottom of 12 is fantastic. From a perspective, from the rain, the coloring of Captain Adam's blast on his face. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yep, there's all kinds of bizarre light sources happening in this scene between the lightning, the otherworldly glow of the antimatter, the Captain Adam's energy blasts. I mean, and Zuko's taking all of this into account, and it's just kind of a shame that that thought process of his isn't being respected by whoever did the recoloration for the trade.
Yeah. I guess I'll throw some notes out. I find it curious that Wolfman does not do any narration for Earth 4 in that first panel, because he does it for Earth X and he does it for Earth S, but does nothing for Earth 4. So part of me wondered, we talked about when we first saw Blue Beetle in issue 1, where they didn't really name where he was from, but when they get to that image of all the heroes on Monitor satellite for the first time, they say something like, assembled here, heroes from Earth 1 and Earth 2. Well, not Blue Beetle, right? So clearly they had to make a distinction by this point, and they already did, that there's an Earth 4.
Yep,
but I guess
the Charlton Heston heroes had their own parallel universe.
Yeah.
It's not just that they were all living on Earth 1 and having their own adventures, but we never told you about it. It's that they've been on a parallel Earth.
It just makes me wonder, could he have said anything? Could he have said exactly what you said? Here are the action heroes facing something. I'm just very surprised there's no narration to introduce us to these characters.
I guess he didn't see a specific, an Earth-specific hook to this place, as opposed to a world where World War II waged on for 40 extra years. Earth 4 is basically just another Earth. It just happened to have a different set of heroes protecting it.
Which could have been interesting. Like maybe that's certainly something that, with think of the multiversity, where I think this was something you commented on before, that Morrison started to open up all the Earths as having, they had to have archetypes of the 7 Justice League members, right? Where this one, where these were characters created in a totally different universe, that you could certainly say this is the quote unquote character or whatever. And then
Captain Atom is kind of the Superman, and Blue Beetle is kind of the Batman, etc.
Right. So I wonder if maybe that could have been the hook. Here's a world where I don't know, but where there is the template of Earths 1, 2, and 3 didn't happen. Because I think isn't that what Pariah said about Earth 6? Like
Exactly. I was just about to make that point. Yeah, there are no analogs, no parallels at all.
So curious. We're getting an introduction without an introduction. So I thought it was kind of fun.
Well, and to be fair, he doesn't really give Earth S that much of an intro either. He just says on page 16, Earth S, the crux point of another universe about to die, and then right into the action from there.
That's true.
But yeah, I take your point. It would have been nice if he could have come up with something else to set the scene, just to give Earth 4 its own identity for the reader to latch on to before launching into the action of the scene.
Yeah. We have Earths 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 now. Do you have any speculation of what an Earth 5 would be?
I've always kind of assumed that the first nameless Earth we saw die at the beginning of Crisis 1 was Earth 5.
Okay.
That's the number I've assigned it in my headcanon.
Okay. I'll take that. So I'm going to just riff on some page 12 notes. It's Kid Flash. It's Jay Garrick Flash and Katana and 3 aliens.
And one of them, I mentioned earlier, I had another note about Block and his dialogue. This is it. It's Block who's saying, "But the rain flash, it is unearthly." And that's a very good thing to be coming out of an alien's mouth, especially one from a 30th century future reality when interplanetary travel is common. It's another character who was Earthborn might have said something like, "This is unnatural," or "This is weird." But Block, from an enlightened, man of the galaxy, as it were, from the future. I mean, what is natural really? What's natural on one planet might not be on another, and vice versa. But from what he understands of Earth and its atmospheric conditions from his time in the Legion, he remarks, this, instead of saying this is weird or this is unnatural, he says this is not like what usually happens on this planet, as far as I know.
Right.
So it's a good choice of words by Wolfman there.
And it really, I think this pairing, more than the other two, shows the real scope of the DC universe. Because you have a golden age, you have 2 modern characters, and Azrael, but two of them are alien. Katana's Japanese, and then you have Block, who's a 30th century humanoid-esque kind of character.
Yes, there's a wide range of planets, parallel universes, eras of publishing, and genomes.
Yeah. Perez giving us a clue as to who might be striking down Azrael with the design of the atom blast. That's pretty fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I really have for 12. Do you have anything for that page?
No, just the Block thing that I mentioned. And we talked about, the lighting effects and Jay Garrick down there in the lower left-hand corner, who does look, really cool.
Yeah.
And then we get to the DC Universe debuts of several Charlton characters on page 13.
Captain Atom, Peacemaker, and Nightshade, and we'll get to Judo Master in a little bit. We've already seen Blue Beetle in the first bunch of issues. Is that a battle cry, do you think? Up and Atom, Captain Atom? Do you think that's from like a Charlton comic?
I don't think so, no. I think that's just Blue Beetle being a smart ass. Even in the midst of his Psycho-Pirates-induced terror, he's still making bad jokes.
Yeah.
Up and Atom, Captain Atom, which is kind of a callback to Adam Ant, the old Hanna-Barbera cartoon character. That was his battle cry. Up and Adam, Adam Ant.
Oh, there you go.
That's for you, Pants, if you're listening.
I wrote here, I said it rhymes. It sounds cool. I love it. I do, and we've talked about Blue Beetle's personality in the first couple, very, very Spider-Man-esque, if you want to say, Peter Parker-esque, cracking jokes, and all that stuff. And being a Steve Ditko character, it makes sense if that was Wolfman's idea or if that was something that played out in his own comic, in Blue Beetle's own comic. I don't know. I've never read those comics. But and kind of shows a lineage to what we will eventually see with the Bwahaha, Keith Giffen, J.M.D. Mateus, Kevin Maguire, Justice League International, where he just continues to be a silly character. So.
Yeah, I've read one issue of Ditko's Silver Age Blue Beetle, and I really didn't get the impression that Ted Kord was that much of a jokester. And there were definite parallels to Peter Parker's personality, but the compulsive jokester routine wasn't necessarily one of them. Ditko wasn't that great at writing comedy.
Do you think that was Wolfman's? You think that's Wolfman's mark on the character then?
It might have been introduced sometime in between Ditko and the present. Like maybe Wolfman was influenced by some of the Charlton Bullseye fanfic.
Okay.
Can't say for sure, but I don't think that it was Ditko who introduced, wisecracking to Ted Kord's DNA.
Okay. So that might be something cool. Like if a listener really knows that might be great to let us know. Because I'd like to know that. I'd like to know where these personalities come from. We get all their names. We also get Peacemaker's, basically his, modus operandi. We'll destroy them all if that's what it takes to keep peace on Earth.
Yep, that's the central paradox of Christopher Smith's character. The man who loved peace so much he was willing to fight for it. And destroy for it, apparently.
And Nightshade's reaction, well, maybe not destroy, but hold on. One of them has a sword.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if that was her breaking the conditioning a little bit or if that's just dialogue. What do you think?
I like to think it's her breaking the conditioning a little bit because I mentioned earlier that Blue Beetle and Question are among the most mentally astute characters of the DC universe. Nightshade's pretty sharp too. I mean, she was an intelligence agent, and she was Captain Atom's partner in liaison. Like, she was assigned to work with him and kind of be his partner and handler as he went about his business as a hero on Earth 4 back in the Silver Age. So Eve Eden is pretty sharp. So I like to think that that's her reining in Peacemaker and also simultaneously reining herself in a little bit.
Cool. What do we think? Let's see. By 1985, we've had Punisher appear over in the Marvel Universe, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Did we get the Punisher miniseries yet? I'm going to look it up here.
By 1985, I think we have.
Okay. What do we think of this? Oh, wait. October 85, so it'll come out in another couple months, the first issue. But we've definitely had the Punisher. Do you think we would get that vibe from this few little things from Peacemaker? Do you think that would be like, oh, look, that looks like DC's answer to Punisher, or is it too early yet?
I think it's too early.
Okay.
Yeah, the Punisher, he was kind of he was mainly an antagonist to that point. I don't think Wolfman was thinking in terms of Punisher when he wrote these couple of lines for Peacemaker.
Yeah. Peacemaker, another character that's making its way to the mass media in a couple of months, right?
It's incredible.
So amazing.
Peacemaker and Polka Dot Man side by side on the big screen.
Weasel. Yeah.
I know. I love the way he looks in that trailer.
It's insane. Like, some of the characters that they chose, I was like, really? Jerry Conway, I really hope he's getting some money because Weasel, of all people. What do you have I have other things for 13, but I want to make sure you get, do you have anything else for 13?
Oh yeah. Well, one thing that I think they did improve in the recoloring, the third panel on page 13, where it's just the bug, with like a little splotch down in the lower right-hand corner, or left-hand corner of that panel. That's supposed to be antimatter, I think. And they recolored that pure white in the trade collection.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do think that looks better.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think we're probably safe to continue on.
Let me give you a few more then on 13. Blue Beetle says, they scared me out of my wits with this fright story that'd give goosebumps to Stephen King. Stephen King has a counterpart on Earth 4. Do you think he's writing the same kind of stories?
It's an interesting question.
Right?
Maybe they're more action-oriented on Earth 4.
Yeah, maybe. You got to think. These Earths have. It's something that Morrison was really good at. Sort of, it's not only just about what kind of heroes you have there, but
Mm-hmm.
how people relate, and Wolfman does it here too. We shouldn't discredit Wolfman or anybody. Gardner Fox, Earth 3. They get it. They get.
Yep, Earth 3, where George Washington betrayed, or George Washington was the traitor and Benedict Arnold the hero,
Right.
where Columbus sailed from North America to discover Europe. Doesn't really make any sense, but at least it's one way of marking the planetary culture of these parallel Earths as something distinct from Earth 1, besides just which interchangeable set of heroes lives there. And I do groove on that stuff. I really do.
Yeah, and I think that's why when I saw the Stephen King thing, it's like, okay, first of all, there's a Stephen King. Secondly, he's got to be writing something different on this universe, just like he would on Earth 3 if there was an Earth 3 Stephen King, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's probably writing fairy tales or something positive on Earth 3. He's probably a big hit. Earth 1 Stephen King is probably a big hit on Earth 3, So I don't know, just an interesting point. I thought that was kind of cool. All right, 14.
Mm-hmm. And we carry over from the last panel on page 13. We get like a rain blurred image of Judo Master up on a rock above Katana's head, plotting his move. He's thinking, where am I? This isn't the Orient, eh? A Japanese woman. I may be wrong. That flash of light merely confused me. And then we leap right into page 14, and he's attacking her, and we get this cool little 4-panel sequence where we get to see Judo Master's judo attack unfold, the different stages of a judo hold and a judo throw.
Yeah, so good from Perez.
Really.
Judo Master, we should say, very much in the vein of like an Iron Fist, right? An American, I think he was an American who just...
Oh, yeah. His real name was Ripley Jagger.
Yeah. Story is he saved somebody's daughter, and then that person rewarded him by teaching him judo, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how
Something
it was?
like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he found an ancient, like lost Tibetan civilization or anything. There's no Kunlun in his background, but he was just a soldier who happened to be good at judo.
So I guess he's the Chuck Norris before Chuck Norris.
Kind of, yeah. He had a sidekick named Tiger, who has not been thrown forward in time with him here, apparently. He's on his own. Yeah. And we do need to stress again that he was a World War II era character. I mean, he didn't appear in comics during the 40s, but his adventures were set back then. And as such, that's why he's spouting words like Oriental or the Orient and attacking Japanese people on sight. Because he was plucked from the middle of war, and he's kind of conditioned to understand the Japanese as his enemies.
Right. So he's very much in the vein of like Commander Steel, created later, but set in World War II.
Yes, good analogy. He was another Charlton Comics character whose adventures appeared in the 60s.
But it is an interesting matchup. It sort of makes sense that Wolfman would put them together on one level, So even their costuming sort of looks the same.
Yeah, they really do. Very similar color schemes.
So then Jones makes a little bit of commentary here. Time must be... He recognizes that Judo Master uses the word allies and of course Nazi. Time must be interchanging earlier on this Earth, because normally the pattern is red skies, bad weather, earthquakes, then, or I think it was weather, then earthquake, then red skies, then the wall, and then destruction, but not time. There was nothing really dealing with time in that instance. So,
yeah, I think the time fluctuations were a consequence of Earths 1 and 2 being saved. Mm-hmm. Isn't that when all that stuff started happening, after they got shunted into the Netherverse?
We had that one appearance during Anthro's appearance in the second issue where he saw the 30th century. So that was sort of like a time quake, and then all those mammoths made their way to the 30th century and then disappeared, right?
Oh, right. That was issue 2, Time and Time Again.
Yeah. So I was reading, after I do all my notes, I always like to look at some of the other annotations and other websites. They don't go anywhere near in depth as we do, but somebody made the supposition that maybe because this is Harbinger doing what she's doing, um, with the notion that they're going to merge, that maybe that's why the time thing might be happening earlier than when they're waiting to be merged, or I don't know. I was like, okay, I guess it's a good explanation as any, maybe at this point. I'm not sure what Wolfman is. It's not like he's breaking his own crisis rules, but I don't know what the answer is. So.
Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he doesn't do that here, but he does certainly break his own rules at other times.
Yeah. The only other thing I have, just random comments. Katana's spirits of my blade. People might not know that. Whenever what is it called? The Soul Taker? Is that what
the Soul Taker, right?
Yeah. Whenever the blade kills someone, it in essence absorbs their spirit. Her husband is in there, I think.
I think her children too.
Oh, okay, her whole family, yeah. So that's where that comes from. So it's not just like it is sort of like Suffering Sappho and Great Scott and Spirits of My Blade.
Even knowing that, it's still kind of an odd thing for a person to say,
right?
Especially when surprised
in the middle of being thrown, spitting out a monologue.
Spirits of my blade.
John Jones and Captain Atom going at each other. They're going to be teammates soon on the other side of all this.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of interesting. Do you like this Captain Atom's look? Do you wish they would have kept this look versus what they came up with Carrie Bates and Pat Broderick?
Not really. It always struck me as kind of strange looking. I'd have preferred that they'd kept the earlier Ditko drawn like gold chainmail with red head mask. But like the metallic arms, but like a unmasked bare skin head. It almost looks like someone popped the head off an action figure and switched it onto another action figure. Just doesn't quite. It's not uniform enough. So I do prefer the full body and head to toe metallic quantum metal coating that he acquired later on. Either that or, like as I said, the earlier golden red color scheme. This interim look always looked kind of weird to me.
Yeah, and they would bring that yellow and red one back every now and then later.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think Alex Ross used that as his reference for his Kingdom Come interpretation of Captain Atom, and that kind of bled over into subsequent regular continuity depictions of the good Captain.
The only other note I have for 14 is I love that Jay Garrick is faster than Peter Cannon.
Well, that's my other note for this page, is that Jay Garrick should be faster than Peter Cannon, because Peter Cannon Thunderbolt was never a speedster.
Oh.
One thing that's always stuck out like a sore thumb about this issue to me is that Peter Cannon's power set was never quite that well defined. Basically, he did find like a hidden Tibetan temple or something. His origin is actually not too far removed from like Doctor Strange's or Iron Fist's. He read some ancient scrolls. Like I think his parents were kind of a standard origin, really, of harkening back to the Golden Age. His parents had connections out there in the Himalayas, and he found these ancient scrolls and read them, and was able, through reading them and intense meditation, learn to unlock the proverbial theoretically untapped 90% of his own mind, and was able to use that to various effects. I guess that could extend to making himself run faster than the average human being, but he was never defined as a speedster. He was never anywhere in the range of any member of the Flash family.
Okay.
So while I believe that he could run faster than the average human, the Flash should have been able to shut him down with both hands and one leg tied behind his back. Not a speedster.
Which I guess that's why Alan Moore then took him one step further with Ozymandias in Watchmen.
Right. Yeah. Right. That is definitely the Charlton character on which Ozymandias Adrian Veidt was based.
And then page 15, you noted that Perez is doing his best Steve Ditko with question. Heroes who will play a more important role later. Do we see that? remember, right? No?
I mean, they're around for the rest. I don't think they really have that much important to do for the rest of the story. I think this is really the most of the spotlight that the Charlton action heroes get.
Maybe he means that we're going to do something with them after but he's never been so obvious in his narration, though. I don't,
Yeah, it's just, maybe he's just making a promise to himself that he'll work them into the script later on, a promise that he then broke, because, as we've said, I'm pretty sure the Charlton heroes really don't have that much to do for the rest of the Maxi series after this.
Any other thoughts on this sequence?
Not really. Just to reiterate once again that Perez does draw a fine Ditko-esque question here.
And this is really what's so really interesting about seeing these characters. Very quickly do they morph away from exactly what they look like here. I have a poster that DC put out in 85 or 86 with all the Charlton characters. Yeah.
I've heard about that poster.
Yeah, I posted it somewhere. I can't remember where, because I was trying to figure out who the artist was. And of course, the name slips I could probably look it up real quick. And they're all set against a gold DC big bullet, but they still look, except for Captain Atom, they still look more or less like what you get here. The sort of standard look.
Did Captain Atom already have his head-to-toe metallic look on that poster?
Yeah, he does, yeah. And they include Sarge Steele.
Oh, yes.
In that shot as well. Let me see if I can quick look it up. So, we've been saying, there it is right away. We've been saying a lot about how we've definitely seen the last of Earth 1 and Earth 2 as we would know them, right? And we're seeing a lot of these other characters. Like in this book is the last time you would see like the question being drawn that way. Actually, Blue Beetle is also, let me see if I can get the image.
It's okay. I actually just Googled it for myself.
Okay, good. But you can see Blue Beetle looks different than what he does here. His goggles are different. Captain Atom is different.
A little more muscular. Yeah, I can see Judo Master's in there. Question doesn't look...
Coloring is different. But
the suit's darker. Not quite as Ditko-esque anymore. And no Peter Cannon, I notice. I know the rights to that character have been a little hinky, I know.
Yeah. I mean, he would eventually get a series. Even Peacemaker's helmet's just tiny differences there, but that might just be artist. And Nightshade, her goggles are a little different.
Yeah, and her costume is going to change drastically very quickly.
Yeah. But great characters. I mean, I think of all the characters spinning out of the DC universe and the ones that we've talked about, Freedom Fighters, although Quality's been around for a while now. Same with the Shazam universe. Boy, what they did with the Charlton characters, really, you almost wish they could have done that with everybody they inherited or picked up. Because 201, I mean, the Question series, phenomenal. The Blue Beetle series, so much fun. Paris Cullen's artwork.
Still haven't read it, but I do have a complete run. I think I put together like 75% of it at one Wild Pig sale.
Oh, wow.
But I do love Paris Cullen's. I loved his art on Blue Devil. And Len Wein wrote the whole thing, didn't he?
Did he write the whole thing? I'm not sure. But yeah, definitely, his baby for the first, whatever. It wasn't long, right? It was only like 20-some issues. I think.
I think it was like 2 years worth of stories. And then there was a Peacemaker miniseries, I remember. Nightshade of... Captain Atom got his ongoing. Carrie Bates and Pat Broderick, I think it was. Oh, good. Nightshade joined the cast of Suicide Squad.
Yeah. And Judo Master, what? Did he show up anywhere? He show up in All-Star Squadron, maybe? Or Young All-Stars? Or
he might have. Yeah, I've actually never read the Young All-Stars series.
Oh. There's a really great, give him a little plug here, there's a great new podcast. They're about up to issue 4 or 5 of the All-Star Squadron. They're going through issue by issue, sometimes 2 issues. And that's been a series that I've been reading, and I think I got up into like the teens or the 20s so that I can start incorporating Infinity Inc. as well. reading it as it came out, and because I need to finish that too, and I would love to go on to Young All Stars, which I really liked for the first year, but I've never finished. So,
what is the name of that podcast? Do you remember?
I as I was speaking, I was like, "Dummy, say the name." It's called "A World on Fire," which was taken from, I think, one of Thomas's narrations about the war or something like that. Like it was on a promo or something. So A World on Fire and All-Star Squadron podcast. So,
very glad such a thing exists. I'll have to check it out.
I have one more thing. I should probably save it for the third Earth that we see. But so far we've had Earth X, which the word fear had come up quite a lot, right? In Earth 4, there is also fear, but there's something else going on here because Kid Flash, or God, I keep saying Kid Flash. Flash says, "Whatever you are, Wings, you sure got sharp." He's chasing after Peter Cannon. Someone or something's made these people doubt our wish to help. So we've gotten fear, we've gotten doubt. You know where I'm going with this?
Hate, perhaps.
Hate, but in the third chapter they call it rage, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? More or less.
So we're basically going down the Psycho Man's bag of tricks.
Yeah, like
3 buttons on his
control box, right? So we got Psycho Pirate, Psycho. I don't know. I can't imagine Wolfman did that on purpose, but
not consciously. I wouldn't think.
But I just looked at that and I went, "Whoa, that's great! Fear, doubt, hate, rage, whatever, same thing." So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was fun. Okay. Wow, this is like old school Crisis tapes, getting to half an issue. Wow, I love that. How you feel?
Yeah, I feel like we've been doing this for 3 hours, but I'm happy.
Good.
I'm glad that we're back in the saddle again.
Yeah, this was fun. This is, like I said, old school. We usually sometimes we only take two episodes per issue. Knowing that issue 7 is a whopper in many ways.
Oh yes, it takes us 2 episodes to get through one normal-sized issue, but something tells me that's going to be another one that's going to take us 3 or 4 3-hour installments to finish off.
It has a cover. It has all kind of craziness. So this is how the Crisis Tapes rolls. If this is the first time you've ever heard of Crisis Tapes, I feel like this is, just to talk generally real quick about this issue. It moves the story, but it doesn't necessarily move the. I don't think there's a lot of themes going on, right? Like I feel like it's like a transitionary kind of issue in a way.
Yeah, it's one of the lighter issues in the overall structure of the story.
Right. Especially for our purposes, it's kind of nice because, or if someone reading it, maybe by this point they're like, we just need an action here. We have all these characters to introduce. Let's not get bogged down into cosmology and all this other stuff,
Yep, let's just throw in these 3 Earths that we need to bring into the mix and just have at them one at a time. Some Marvel-style misunderstanding and manipulation-based conflicts between the heroes of Earths 1 and 2 and the native heroes of these other 3 Earths that we're bringing in.
Right. Any final thoughts?
Only to be continued.
Great. I like that. So send email to comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. Adam, what's your email address?
It's still Murd at comicgeekspeak.com if you'd like to address me directly. And Peter,
I was going to say, I still actually have my old CGS. I don't check it as much, but I do have it. So Peter at comicgeekspeak.com. You could send it there. It'll get to me.
Yep, and there will eventually be a talkback thread at thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. And also, of course, there's our Facebook Comic Geek Speak supergroup where you'll be able to leave some thoughts about the things we've had to say about the first half or so of issue 6 of Crisis. And we always do welcome feedback, as you know, so please let us know your own thoughts.
Great.
To complement our own.
All right. We will be back whenever we are back. We're not going to make any promises. But this has been, I think this has been way painless. This is good. This is,
Yep, this has worked well.
yeah.
Hopefully, as the rest of this year wears on, it'll be called all safe for us to actually be recording in the same physical space again.
That'd be awesome. All right, Adam. I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
You bet.